Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, I'll try to write this out like I'm just posting it online. Still shaken up, here goes. I don't even know where to start with this. I've typed and deleted this about 10 times now. My hands are still not totally steady. I've been reading stories on here for a while, stuff that made the hair on my arms stand up, but I always thought, well, that's not my life. My life is normal, or it was. Now I'm not so sure about anything anymore. This happened back in June of 2012, June 19th to be exact, a Tuesday. I remember because my son, he was 9 years old at the time, had just finished his last T-ball game of the season the weekend before, and this was my first day off since then to just spend with him. We live in Harriman, which is just a regular small Tennessee town. Nothing fancy. Everybody knows everybody. That day, we decided to take a drive. It was a beautiful afternoon, sunny but not too hot. One of those perfect late spring days where the sky is so blue it almost doesn't look real. We were just cruising, no real destination. I had the windows down, my arm hanging out, feeling the warm air. My boy was in the passenger seat, messing with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't just static or preaching. We were on TN Road 61, the part that cuts through Rand County. It's a real pretty drive, 2 lanes, winding through dense woods on both sides. The kind of road where you might see a deer or a turkey, but not much else. The clock on my dash said 3:45. I remember glancing at it, because I was thinking we should probably start heading back soon to beat the worst of the afternoon traffic. Not that there's much around here, but still, we came around a gentle left-hand curve. The trees were thick, a solid wall of green on either side of the road. The sunlight was dappling through the leaves, making shifting patterns on the asphalt, and that's when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 12 car lengths, something was crossing the road. My first thought wasn't even a thought, it was just a jolt like a physical shock. My brain couldn't process it. It was big, so damn big, and it was upright, not hunched over like a bear, but walking on 2 legs straight up. It was black, not like a suit black, but a deep, matte, hairy black, like old charcoal. The sun was hitting it from the side, and there was no shine to it at all. It just absorbed the light. It was coming from the woods on our left, moving fast, heading into the woods on the right. I've replayed this in my head 1,000 times. It took 3 steps. 3, that's it, to cross both lanes of the road. The legs were long, like impossibly long, and it moved with this kind of powerful, fluid stride. It wasn't running, it was just stepping. 1, 2, 3, and it was across. But the worst part, the part that still wakes me up at night, was that it looked at us. As it took its second step, right in the middle of the road, its upper body turned. Not its whole body, just its head and shoulders, and it looked right at the car, right at me. I couldn't see any eyes, not from that distance, just a dark shape where a face should be. But I felt its gaze. It was a conscious, intelligent look. It knew we were there. It was assessing us. Then it took its third step and just melted into the brush on the right-hand side of the road. It didn't crash through the branches or anything. 1 second it was there, this massive, impossible thing, and the next second it was just gone. The leaves where it entered were still swaying. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds. 3, tops. I slammed on the brakes. The tires squealed a little. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I just sat there, my foot jammed on the brake pedal, both hands clenched on the wheel, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The car stalled out. It got dead quiet, just the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled and the leaves rustling in the breeze. Dad? My son's voice was small and scared. I'd forgotten he was there for a second. I looked over at him. His eyes were huge, his face pale. He was gripping the edges of his seat. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I just nodded. I couldn't speak. My mouth was completely dry. "What do you say?" "Yeah, son, I just saw a monster." We sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. I kept staring at the tree line, half expecting it to come back out. Nothing moved. It was just woods. Normal, quiet, Tennessee woods. I finally took a shaky breath and restarted the car. My hands were trembling so bad I had trouble turning the key. I put the car in drive and crept forward. As we passed the exact spot, I looked over to the right, into the woods. It was too dark and thick to see anything more than a few feet in, just shadows and more leaves. I didn't stop. I drove. I pushed the gas pedal down and got the hell out of there. I drove faster than I should have on that winding road, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, expecting to see it loping after us. I didn't say a word to my boy, and he didn't say anything to me. We were both just locked in our own private terror. When we got home, I tried to act normal for my wife, but I was a wreck. I kept seeing it in my mind over and over. That look, that three-step crossing, the sheer size of it. I told her we saw a big black bear run across the road. It was the only thing that made any kind of sense, even though I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk like that. They don't have that kind of proportion. They don't cross a 2-lane road in 3 strides. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. I'd be driving, and my heart would start racing if I saw a dark shape on the side of the road. I felt jumpy, paranoid. My son had nightmares. He started wanting a nightlight again, something he hadn't needed since he was 5. The rational part of my brain was fighting a war with what my eyes had seen. It was a person in a suit, a hoax, a shadow, a trick of the light, but it wasn't. The road was clear, the light was good, it was solid, it was real, and my son saw it too. We both saw the same thing. A week went by. It was a Tuesday again. The unease hadn't faded. It had just become a part of me. This low-grade hum of fear in the background of everything I did. I had the day off again. I dropped my son at a friend's house, and without even really deciding to, I found myself driving back down TN 61. I felt sick the whole way there. My stomach was in knots, but I had to go back. I had to know. I found the curve. It was easy to recognize. I pulled my truck over onto the narrow gravel shoulder on the left side of the road, right about where we'd been when I first saw it. The spot where it had crossed was directly opposite me. I sat in the truck for a few minutes just listening. The woods were quiet. No birds. That was the first thing I noticed. It was just silent. I got out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air felt heavy. I walked across the road, my eyes scanning the ground. The asphalt told me nothing. But when I got to the grassy, overgrown ditch on the right side, I saw it. A footprint. It was pressed deep into the soft, damp earth at the edge of the ditch. It was huge, longer than my boot by a good 6 inches, and wider. It was a long, human-like foot, but the toes, they were just indistinct, wide splayed impressions. It wasn't a bare foot, not exactly, but it wasn't a boot either. The sheer size of it made my blood run cold. I followed the direction it was pointing, into the brush. And that's when I saw the path. It wasn't a real path. It was more like something had just forced its way through, a tunnel of sorts, where the thick undergrowth was pushed down and broken. Saplings as thick as my wrist were snapped off about 4 feet up. I had to duck to get under the low-hanging branches. I only went in about 15 feet. That was all I could take. The air was even heavier in there, stale and thick. And that's when I saw the bed. That's the only word for it. It was a bedded down area, a nest. A large circle of ferns and tall grass had been flattened down in a swirling pattern. It was big. If I lay down in it, my head and feet wouldn't have touched the edges. The grass was still green, but it was pressed down, matted. It was fresh. This hadn't been here for weeks. This was from the last few days, and leading away from this flattened circle was a more defined trail. A line of disturbed brush and broken branches heading off deeper into the forest, a place so dark and tangled I couldn't see more than 20 feet into it. I stood there, in that little clearing, looking at that bed and that trail, and the full, horrifying reality of what happened a week before crashed down on me. It hadn't just crossed the road and kept going. It had come from the left, crossed the road in 3 steps, and then it dropped. It dropped down low, right here, in this exact spot just inside the tree line. It had bedded down in this nest of ferns. It had hidden itself. We hadn't just seen it, it had seen us. And as we drove past, terrified, it was right here, lying here, maybe watching our car go by. It had been hiding from us or waiting for us to leave, no more than 30, 40 feet from the road. The terror I felt in the car was nothing compared to what I felt standing there. It was a deep, primal, cold fear that started in my guts and spread out to my fingertips. The silence was no longer just quiet. It was a listening silence. I felt exposed, like I was being watched from the deep shadows of the woods. Every hair on my body was standing up. I didn't take pictures. I didn't investigate the trail. I just turned around and practically ran back to my truck. I fumbled with the keys, got in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a minute, just breathing hard, staring at my white-knuckled hands on the steering wheel. I drove home and I haven't been back since. I don't ever plan on going back. That was years ago now. My son is a teenager. We've never really talked about it since that day in the car. It's just this thing that sits between us, this shared secret that's too big and too scary to put into words. I still drive on TN61 sometimes when I have to, but I never take that curve slowly. I speed up, and I never ever look too closely at the tree line on the right-hand side. I know what was there. I know what it did. It didn't just cross the road. It saw us, and it dropped down to hide. And the thought of what might have happened if we'd stopped the car, if I'd gotten out right then, that's the thought that haunts me. That's the part I can't shake. It was so close. We were so close to something I still can't name. And to this day, I have no idea what it was or what it wanted. Story 2. All right, I've been sitting on this for a while now, but I think I need to just type it out. Maybe it'll help, I don't know. Maybe someone else has been through something like this. I've never posted anything like this before, but I can't shake it. This happened to me back in September of 2018. I'm a hunter, have been my whole life. My dad taught me. His dad taught him. We know the woods, or at least I thought I did. That day started like any other late-season deer hunt. I was up near Forks, Washington. In this patch of old-growth forest I've been hunting for years. It's dense, quiet, the kind of place where the light gets swallowed up by the canopy. I'd gotten to my spot in the afternoon, a tree stand I'd bolted into a big fir tree maybe 15, 20 feet up. It's a good spot, overlooks a small clearing where deer like to cross around dusk. Everything was normal. I remember the air was cool, that crisp smell of pine and damp earth. I was just sitting there, my rifle across my lap, watching the shadows get longer. The woods were quiet, the way they get when something's about to happen, but I just figured it was the usual pre-dusk lull. I was scanning the tree line, looking for movement, for that flicker of brown that means a deer. The first thing that felt off was the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was a dead silence. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. It was like someone had thrown a blanket over the whole forest. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, that gut feeling you get when you know you're not alone. I figured it was maybe a bear. We have black bears around here, but they usually don't bother you if you don't bother them. I tightened my grip on my rifle anyway. Then I saw it. Movement at the far edge of the clearing. But it was all wrong. It was too tall. Way too tall. It wasn't walking on all fours. It was upright. My brain tried to make it a bear standing up, but the proportions were just off. This thing was massive, and it was covered in this long, shaggy, dark brown hair that was almost black in the fading light. Its head was weird, kind of sloped, no visible neck to speak of. It just blended into these huge shoulders. I froze, completely froze. I wasn't even breathing, I just stared, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack one. This thing was just standing there, maybe 70 yards away, half hidden by the ferns. It was just looking around, its head moving slowly. It had to be 8 feet tall, easy, maybe more. I've seen a lot of things in the woods, but nothing like this. Nothing that walked on 2 legs that wasn't a person, and this was no person. I must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath or something, because its head snapped toward me. I didn't see its eyes, not then, but I felt it looking right at me. It knew I was there. It took a step into the clearing, and that's when I saw a second one. This one was smaller, maybe 7 feet, but built the same. Dark fur, that same powerful, slouched posture. It came out from behind a tree to the right of the first one. They didn't make a sound. No grunt, no snap of a twig, nothing. They just started moving, circling the clearing, but not like animals hunting. It was more deliberate, like they were surrounding the area, and I was right in the middle of it, stuck up in my tree. My mind was screaming, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. The words felt stupid, like a joke, but there was nothing funny about it. This was real. These were real, living things, and they had me cornered. I was gripping my rifle so tight my knuckles were white. It was a .30-06, plenty for a deer or a bear, but staring down at these two, it felt like a BB gun. The bigger one, the first one I saw, stopped directly below my tree. I could smell it then. It was a musky, wet dog smell, but stronger, mixed with something else, something rotten and earthy. It was thick, and it made my stomach turn. I could hear it breathing. It wasn't panting. It was this low, heavy breathing, like air moving through a big pipe. Shh. Shh. It looked up. The light was almost gone, but I saw its eyes. They weren't glowing or anything, but they caught the last bit of light. They were a dark, deep-set brown, and they were intelligent. Not like a dog's eyes. There was something in them, a kind of cold, calculating awareness that made my blood run cold. It knew I was a person. It knew I was scared. The smaller one was pacing back and forth at the edge of the clearing, its head swiveling to keep me in sight. They were working together. I could feel it. This wasn't random. The big one reached out and put a hand on the trunk of my tree. Its hand was huge, fingers thick and long, and it was dark like old leather. It didn't have claws like a bear, but the fingers looked powerful. It just rested its palm against the bark. Then it shook the tree. It wasn't a violent shake, not at first. It was a testing shake, a firm, deliberate push. My whole stand shuddered. The metal groaned. I grabbed onto the sides, my heart in my throat. I thought I was going to be sick. This thing was strong enough to shake a full-grown fir tree with me in it. Panic took over. Pure, stupid panic. I didn't think. I just raised my rifle. I didn't aim. I just pointed it down and fired. The sound was deafening. The recoil slammed into my shoulder. The bigger one let out a sound I will never, ever forget. It wasn't a roar. It was a guttural, sharp scream of pain, mixed with pure rage, a high-pitched, deafening shriek that felt like it vibrated in my bones. I saw it stagger back, clutching its shoulder. Dark blood, black in the twilight, welled up between its fingers. For a second, everything was frozen. The smaller one stopped pacing. The big one was hunched over, making this horrible, wet, choking sound. Then all hell broke loose. The smaller one didn't hesitate. It let out a lower, rumbling growl and charged the base of the tree. It started shaking it hard this time, not testing it, trying to tear it down. The whole world was rocking. I was holding on for dear life, my fingers cramping, my teeth rattling. I could hear the bolts in my stand straining. And then the big one, even wounded, straightened up. The pain in its eyes was gone, replaced by a fury that was absolutely terrifying. It looked right at me, and it roared. This was a roar, a deep, chest-rattling roar that echoed through the trees. It was a challenge, a promise. It bent down, scooped up a rock the size of a cantaloupe, and threw it at me. It wasn't a weak toss. It was a fastball. It slammed into the trunk just below my feet with a sickening thwack, splintering the wood. That's when the answering calls started. From the forest, all around me, more of those roars and growls echoed back. They weren't close, but they weren't far. There were more of them, a lot more. My blood went from cold to ice. I was surrounded, completely and utterly trapped. The next few hours were a blur of pure terror. I crouched down in my stand, making myself as small as possible. I was shaking so bad I could barely hold on. They didn't stop. The two below kept at it. The smaller one would shake the tree until I thought it would snap, and the big one, bleeding from its shoulder, would throw things. Rocks, branches, chunks of dirt. It was like a rain of debris from the darkness. I could hear them thudding against the trunk, whizzing past my head. A few smaller rocks hit me in the back and legs. They stung, but the fear was so much worse. I could hear them moving down there, their heavy footsteps, the crunch of leaves, their low, communicating grunts and growls. They were talking to each other, coordinating. The one in the trees would grunt, and the one throwing rocks would change position. They were intelligent. They were hunting me. Every time I dared to peek over the edge, I'd see those glinting eyes in the dark. Not just two pairs anymore. I saw 3, 4 others moving in the deeper shadows of the trees, just watching. They had me completely boxed in. I was numb. My legs were cramping from crouching. My hands were raw from gripping the cold metal of the stand. I was exhausted, but the adrenaline wouldn't let me go. I just remember thinking over and over, this is how I die. I'm going to be torn apart by things nobody believes in. Time lost all meaning. It felt like an eternity. I just huddled there, listening to their sounds, smelling their musk, feeling the tree shudder. I prayed for the sun to come up. I've never wanted to see daylight so badly in my life. And then, slowly, it started to happen. The blackness of the night began to soften to a deep, dark blue. The stars started to fade. The forest around me became shapes instead of pure shadow. The throwing had stopped maybe an hour before, but the pacing and the low growls had continued. As the first real hint of grey touched the sky, the sounds stopped. Just stopped. The heavy breathing, the footsteps, the guttural noises, it all just ceased. The forest was silent again, but this time it was the empty silence of them being gone. I didn't move. I stayed crouched, listening, for what felt like another hour. My body was screaming at me to move, to stretch, but I was too scared. What if it was a trick? What if they were just waiting for me to make a sound? Finally, when the sun was properly up, casting long, weak rays through the trees, I risked it. I slowly, painfully, uncurled myself. Every muscle protested. I looked over the edge of the stand. The clearing was empty. I scanned the tree line. Nothing. No movement. No eyes. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely undo the safety harness. I climbed down the ladder, my legs feeling like jelly. When my boots hit the ground, I almost collapsed. The ground was a mess. The grass and ferns were all trampled flat in a wide circle around my tree. There were footprints. Deep, huge footprints pressed into the soft earth. They were long, easily 18 inches and wide. They had a distinct shape, like a human foot but broader, with the impressions of 5 toes. And there was blood, a trail of dark, splattered drops leading off into the woods from where the big one had been hit. All around the base of the tree were broken branches, rocks of all sizes, and clods of dirt. One of the rocks had taken a chunk out of the trunk big enough to stick my fist in. I didn't stay to examine it. I grabbed my rifle, which felt useless and heavy, and I started walking. I didn't run, not at first because I was too shaky, but I moved as fast as I could without falling over. My truck was about a mile away down an old logging road. The entire walk back, I felt watched. I kept spinning around, expecting to see one of them step out from behind a tree. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. That feeling of being watched, of being hunted, clung to me the whole way. It was a physical pressure on my back. I finally saw my truck, the old green Ford, and I've never been so relieved to see anything in my life. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking, got the door open and threw my gear in. I locked the doors and just sat there for a minute, breathing hard, my forehead resting on the steering wheel. I never went back to that tree stand. I stopped hunting for a long time after that. I still go out sometimes, but I stick to more open areas. And I'm never in the woods after dark, not ever. People talk about Bigfoot like it's a myth, a fun story for around a campfire. It's not. I saw them. I smelled them. I heard them plan. I saw the intelligence and the pure, raw aggression in their eyes. I shot one, and they didn't run. They got angrier. They called for backup. They laid siege to my tree for hours. I don't know what they are. I don't care. All I know is that they're out there, and they are not the gentle giants some people make them out to be. They are powerful, they are smart, and they are territorial as hell. That day in September of 2018, I was just a guy going deer hunting. I came back a different person. I still have nightmares about that roar, the one full of pain and hate, and the sound of rocks hitting the tree in the dark. I'll probably have them for the rest of my life. Story 3. Shin. All right, I've never told this to anyone besides my fiancée, and even then, we don't really talk about it anymore. It's just this thing that sits between us, this shared secret that feels too big and too weird to say out loud to normal people. But I've been reading stories on here for a while, and I see that some of you might get it. So I'm just gonna write it down. Get it out. This happened on August 2nd, 1998. A Sunday. I remember because we'd spent the whole weekend camping off Ben Smith Road, right near the Wilson River in Oregon. It was our last day. We'd already packed up the tent and most of our gear into the back of my old Jeep Cherokee. The plan was to just get in and drive home, but it was one of those brutally hot August days where the air feels thick and the sun just beats down on you. We were both sticky with sweat and grime from breaking down the campsite. The river was right there, shimmering and cool looking, and my fiancé Sean turned to me and said, "We can't drive home like this. Let's just go rinse off real quick, 5 minutes." It made sense. The river access was just a short walk from where we'd parked, so we left the Jeep, just in our shorts and t-shirts, and walked down to the bank. The water was ice cold, the kind of cold that steals your breath for a second. It felt amazing. Sean waded in first, up to her knees, splashing water on her face and arms. I was still on the bank, just about to take my shoes off, when I saw it. It was on the opposite bank, maybe 45, 50 yards away. At first I thought it was a person. My brain automatically went to person. It was pacing, not walking, pacing, like someone who's agitated or waiting for something. A slow, heavy back and forth movement along the tree line. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, and it had a sort of lumbering gait. I remember thinking, who is that? What are they doing? It was weird, because we hadn't seen anyone else down by the river all morning. Just some mountain bikers we'd heard earlier on a trail farther up. I didn't say anything to Sean right away. I just watched. It was far enough away that details were fuzzy. I figured it was probably another hiker, maybe looking for a crossing point or something, but the pacing was off. It wasn't the casual stroll of someone enjoying the woods. It was purposeful and tense. Then Sean, who was still in the water, turned around to say something to me and lost her footing a little on the slick rocks. She let out a small yelp as she caught herself. Nothing loud, just a surprised, "Whoa!" The moment she made that sound, the figure across the river froze. Just stopped dead. And it turned its head and looked right at us. That was the first jolt of something being wrong. The way it froze was instantaneous. One second it was moving, the next it was a statue, and its focus was entirely on us. It wasn't a casual glance, it was a stare. I felt it even from across the river. I felt seen. Sean had steadied herself and noticed I was staring. "What?" she asked, her voice low. She followed my gaze. "What is that?" "I don't know," I muttered. "It was just pacing over there." We both stood there, watching it watch us. The air, which had felt so hot and heavy just moments before, now felt thin and charged. The only sound was the river gurgling over the rocks. The creature, I have to call it that now, was half in the shadows of the trees, but I could see it was covered in hair, a reddish blonde color, like a dirty strawberry blonde. It wasn't the uniform brown of a bear. It was hair like an animal's, but the shape underneath was all wrong. I took a couple of steps away from the tree I was near, moving into a more open patch on the bank to get a better look. I think part of me was still trying to rationalize it, to force my brain to make it into a man in a fur coat or something, anything familiar. That's when the terror really hit. The moment I moved into the open, the moment it had a completely clear, unobstructed view of me, I got a clear view of it. It wasn't human. The proportions were wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. Its shoulders were massive and sloped, but its waist and legs seemed narrower, powerful, but built differently from a man's. The hair covered its entire body, thick and matted. I couldn't see its face clearly, it was too far, but I could see the general shape of its head. And it wasn't a bear's snout, it was flatter, more like ours, but not. It was just a dark patch under a heavy brow, and I knew it was staring right into me. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was a primal, deep-seated fear. The kind you don't think about, the kind that just floods your system and tells you one thing: you are not the top of the food chain here. It didn't make a sound. It didn't growl or scream like in the movies. It just stood there, utterly still, and watched us. Then, in a movement that was both swift and strangely fluid, it shifted its weight and took a single step sideways, putting the trunk of a big cedar tree between us. It wasn't a run. It was a deliberate act of concealment. It was hiding. That was almost worse than if it had charged. The intelligence in that movement was undeniable. It wasn't just an animal reacting. It was assessing us, and it decided to break line of sight. Sean was out of the water in seconds, her feet slipping on the stones. She scrambled up the bank to me, her face pale. "What the hell is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. She was clutching my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "I don't know," I said again, but this time my voice was a shaky mess. "I don't know what it is." We stood there, frozen ourselves, for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. We were staring at the spot where it had been, at the tree it was now behind. We couldn't see it, but we knew it was there. We could feel it. The air was dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the river and the pounding of my own blood in my ears. My mind was racing, trying to fit what I was seeing into a box I understood. A bear? No. The build, the posture, the way it moved its arms, the way it hid. It wasn't a bear. A person in a suit? Out here, in the middle of nowhere on a blistering hot day? It made no sense, and the way it had frozen and stared. That wasn't a person playing a prank. That was a predator's focus. "Let's go," Sean said, her voice barely audible. "Let's go right now." I didn't need any convincing. We turned and practically ran back up the path to the jeep. We weren't graceful. We stumbled over roots, our wet feet slipping in our shoes. I kept glancing back, expecting to see it following us, but the riverbank remained empty. The woods were still. We reached the jeep and yanked the doors open, scrambling inside. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, spinning the tires on the gravel as I pulled out onto Ben Smith Road. For the first minute, neither of us spoke. We just breathed, ragged and loud in the quiet of the car. The air conditioning was blasting, and the cold air on my sweaty skin made me shiver. "Did you see that?" Sean finally said, her voice hollow. "Yeah," I managed. "I saw it." "What was it?" I just shook my head. I had no words. We drove in silence for another few minutes, the tension in the car so thick you could taste it. Then, as we came around a bend in the road, we passed the spot again. The road ran parallel to the river for a stretch here, and we could see the opposite bank clearly through the trees. We both looked. We couldn't help it. And there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. The spot was empty. But in the deep shadows under the trees, back from the bank, I saw a flicker of movement, a patch of reddish blonde, darker in the shade, shifting behind a thicket of salal. It wasn't pacing anymore. It was just standing there, deep in the tree cover, watching the road, watching us drive away. It had waited. It had hidden itself perfectly until we were gone. That was the moment any last shred of doubt left me. A bear wouldn't do that. A person wouldn't do that. This thing had seen us, identified us as a potential threat or point of interest, and it had strategically positioned itself to observe our departure without being seen. The intelligence, the caution, was staggering. We didn't smell anything weird, no foul odor or anything like that. We didn't hear any whoops or knocks on wood. There was just the visual, the silence, and this overwhelming, oppressive feeling of being in the presence of something ancient and unknown. The rest of the drive home was quiet. We tried to talk about it once we got back to our apartment, trying to make sense of it. We kept coming back to the same things: the non-human build, the long arms, the way it used the brush to hide, the way it watched us leave. We talked about the mountain bikers we'd seen earlier that morning, how they'd been loud, laughing, and the creature, if it was around then, had completely avoided them. But with us, alone and quiet by the river, it had chosen to reveal itself, or at least it had been caught. Sean was the one who said it first. It didn't feel malevolent. It felt curious and cautious, and it was smaller than the ones you hear about. Do you think, could it have been a female? The thought had crossed my mind too. The size, maybe around 6 feet, not the 8 or 9 foot giants of lore. The hair color, reddish, which I've since read is sometimes reported. It fit. We didn't have any other explanation that fit what we saw, what we felt. We never went back to that spot. We still camp, but we stick to more populated areas now. The encounter left us with this persistent, strange feeling, a certainty that we had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't a feeling of being hunted, not really. It was a feeling of having a veil pulled back for just a second, of seeing a piece of the world that is supposed to stay hidden. And the most chilling part, the part that stays with me even now, all these years later, is the memory of it standing in the shadows of those trees, patiently waiting for us to leave, its eyes on our car until we were out of sight. It knew we were there, it knew what we were, and it just watched. Dadigis, Story 4. It was one of those perfect late September afternoons in 1997, the kind where the air feels crisp, but the sun still warms your skin through your jacket. I'd just gotten out of school, my senior year, and instead of heading home, I threw my bow and gear in the back of my beat-up Ford pickup and pointed it towards Baker County. Archery season had just opened, and I was itching to get out there. I'd been hunting these woods with my dad since I was big enough to carry a BB gun, so I knew the area pretty well, or at least I thought I did. The road up to the pass was rough, just a couple of dirt tracks really, winding through thick stands of pine and fir. My truck bounced and rattled over the ruts, the radio fading into static until I just turned it off. The silence felt heavier than usual, but in a good way. It was my time to just be alone, to think about nothing but the hunt. I remember the dust from the road coating my side mirrors in a fine tan powder. I parked at a pull-off near the top of the pass, the kind of spot only locals know about. The engine ticked as it cooled down, the only sound besides the wind whispering through the high branches. I grabbed my binoculars from the passenger seat and did what we always call glassing, just slowly scanning the clear cuts and timber stands across the valley, looking for any movement, any shape that didn't belong. The light was starting to get that long, golden quality, casting deep shadows that made everything look different. I stood by the truck for a good 20 minutes, just looking. My neck was getting stiff from holding the binoculars up. I saw a few deer, way off in the distance, but nothing I wanted to take a shot at. I decided to hike along the ridge for a better vantage point. The air was cool enough that I worked up a light sweat under my layers. The forest floor was a soft carpet of old pine needles and fallen leaves, so my footsteps were quiet. I remember the smell, that clean, damp earth smell mixed with pine sap. I found a good spot behind a big, old, fallen log. It was perfect. It gave me cover and a clear line of sight down into a bowl-shaped clearing about 500 yards away. I settled in, my back against the rough bark, and got my binoculars ready again. This was the part of hunting I loved most. The waiting, the watching. The world just gets quiet and you become a part of it. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear. It was a dark, bulky shape moving along the tree line on the far side of the clearing. My heart did a little jump. A good-sized black bear would be a real trophy. I lifted my binoculars, my elbows propped on the log to steady them. The image swam for a second before it focused. The shape was still about 500 yards out, a dark blotch against the green and brown of the forest. It was moving away from me, and I remember thinking its fur looked almost black, but with a reddish tinge in the sunlight, like wet bark. I kept watching, my finger resting on the focus wheel. It was moving with a purpose, not meandering like a bear looking for grubs. It was just going. And then, as it started to angle slightly across the clearing, the distance closing to maybe 200 yards, my brain started to short-circuit. It was walking on two legs. I actually remember taking the binoculars away from my eyes for a second, blinking and rubbing my eyes with my thumb and forefinger. I thought the strain was making me see things. My heart wasn't just jumping with excitement anymore. It was starting to hammer against my ribs. I put the binoculars back up. My hands were suddenly unsteady. It was still there, and it was definitely walking upright. It wasn't a clumsy, shuffling walk like a bear sometimes does for a few steps. This was a smooth, powerful stride. Its arms swung at its sides. The proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were massive, way broader than any man's, and they sloped down to long, heavily muscled arms. I couldn't make out a neck. Its head seemed to sit directly on those huge shoulders. The body was thick, covered in that dark, shaggy hair. It must have been 7, maybe 8 feet tall. The sheer size of it made my mouth go dry. I was frozen, just watching this thing move through the trees at the edge of the clearing. I wasn't a kid who scared easy. I'd been charged by a cow elk. I'd had a cougar scream in the dark not 50 yards from my tent, but this was a different kind of fear. This was a deep, cold dread that started in my gut and was spreading out to my fingers and toes. This wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't in the rule book. I was holding my breath without realizing it. I let it out in a shaky puff that fogged the eyepieces of my binoculars for a second. I wiped them clean on my sleeve, my movements hurried and jerky. When I looked again, it had stopped. It was just standing there, facing away from me, partially obscured by some young fir trees. I could see its broad back, the way the muscles moved under that dark coat, and then I shifted my weight. It was just a tiny adjustment, my knee pressing into the soft ground, a small crunch of dirt and pine needles. That was all it took. The creature went perfectly still. I mean, it had already been still, but this was different. This was the absolute, rigid stillness of a predator that has heard something. My own body locked up in response. I didn't even dare to breathe. Then its head turned. It didn't turn like a person turns their head. It didn't turn like any animal I've ever seen. Its entire upper body, shoulders, chest, and head pivoted as one solid piece. There was no neck craning, no shifting of its feet. It just rotated at the waist a good 90 degrees, and its head was now facing directly up the hill, directly at me. The binoculars brought its face into a horrifying clarity. I couldn't see fine details like eyes or a nose. It was too shadowed under a heavy brow ridge, but I could feel it looking at me. I know that sounds crazy, but you have to understand, in that moment, there was no doubt. It knew I was there. It knew exactly where I was hiding behind that log. The intelligence in that look was palpable. This wasn't the blank curiosity of a deer or the dim awareness of a bear. This was a calculating, focused awareness. It was assessing me. Terror, pure and simple, washed over me. It was a physical sensation, like being plunged into ice water. My skin prickled all over, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead and back. My bow was lying on the ground next to me, and it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. I was completely exposed. I felt like a rabbit caught in an open field. We stayed like that, locked in that silent stare for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few seconds. The world had shrunk to just me and this thing and the space between us. The forest sounds, the birds, the wind had all vanished. There was only the pounding of my own blood in my ears. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, it moved again. Its upper body pivoted back, that same unnatural single-piece movement, until it was facing away from me once more, and then it started to move. It didn't run, it didn't crash through the undergrowth, it glided. Its walk turned into this incredibly fast, smooth, almost fluid motion. It just flowed through the trees. It moved between the trunks and ferns with an ease that was impossible for something that big. There was no sound, no snapping twigs, no rustling leaves. 1 second it was there, a dark shape receding into the timber, and the next second it was just gone. The forest where it had been was empty. I didn't move for a long time. I just stayed crouched behind that log, my muscles screaming from the tension. My breathing was coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I was shaking uncontrollably, a fine tremor that started deep inside my bones. I kept my eyes glued to the spot where it had disappeared, expecting it to reappear at any moment, expecting it to be right in front of me. Slowly, painfully, I reached for my bow. My fingers were so numb I could barely grip it. I stood up, my legs feeling like rubber. I didn't even bother to brush the dirt off my knees. I just started walking back towards my truck. I wasn't quiet anymore. I didn't care about spooking game. I crashed through the brush, my head on a swivel, scanning every shadow, every cluster of trees, every normal sound. A squirrel chattering, a bird taking flight, made me jump. The hike back felt 10 times longer than the hike in. The friendly, familiar woods had become a threatening, alien place. The shadows were no longer just shadows. They were hiding places. The sun dipping below the ridgeline didn't bring a beautiful sunset. It brought a deepening dread as the light faded. When I finally saw my truck, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. I practically ran the last 50 yards. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking so badly I could hardly get the key in the door. I threw my bow onto the passenger seat and climbed in, locking the doors immediately. I just sat there for a minute, both hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I could smell my own sweat, a sharp, sour smell of fear. I started the engine and didn't even wait for it to warm up. I slammed the truck into gear and spun it around, kicking up gravel and dirt. I drove down that rough road faster than I ever had, the truck bouncing and lurching, branches scraping against the sides. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I was too afraid of what I might see following me. I didn't stop until I hit the paved county road at the bottom of the mountain. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the truck in park, and just sat there, my forehead resting on the cool steering wheel. My whole body was trembling. I replayed it over and over in my head. The way it walked, The way it pivoted, the way it looked at me, that look. It was the look of something that knew what I was and knew that I didn't belong there. I've spent my whole life outdoors. I know what a bear looks like. I know how an elk moves. I know the gait of a deer. This was none of those things. The way its upper body turned as one solid unit, that's something I've never seen in any living creature. It was mechanically wrong, biologically impossible. But I saw it. I drove home in a daze. I walked into the house and my wife took one look at me and asked what was wrong. I must have been white as a sheet. I just shook my head and said I didn't feel well, that I must be coming down with something. I couldn't tell her. I didn't have the words. How do you tell the person you love that you saw something that shouldn't exist, something that looked at you with more intelligence than any animal has a right to have? I never went back to that spot. Not ever. I still hunt, but I stick to different areas, places with more people, more open ground. That was more than 25 years ago now. I'm a grown man with a family, a job, a mortgage. I've lived a whole life since that afternoon, but sometimes, when I'm out in the woods and the light is just right, or the wind makes a certain sound in the trees, I'll get a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. I'll remember the way it stopped, the way it turned, and the way it glided away without a sound. And I know, with a certainty that still sits like a cold stone in my stomach, that it wasn't a bear. It was something else. And it saw me. Story 5. To get home, I have to cut through this long, wooded back road. It's a shortcut, shaves off a good 20 minutes from the main highway. But it's not a road you'd want to break down on. It's narrow, hemmed in on both sides by a thick wall of pine and oak, and there's absolutely no cell service for a solid 5-mile stretch. I've driven it 1,000 times, always with a little knot of anxiety in my stomach, but nothing ever happened. Until that night. I was about 5 miles in, the darkness pressing in from all sides, my headlights carving out the only piece of the world that existed. The car had been making a weird whining noise for a couple days, but I'd been too busy and too broke to get it looked at. I remember thinking, just get me home, just this once, and I'll take you in tomorrow, I promise. That's when the whining turned into a loud, choking rattle. The dashboard lights flickered, a Christmas tree of warnings, and then the engine just died. Completely. The power steering locked up, and I had to wrestle the car to a shaky stop on the narrow gravel shoulder. Silence. Not the good kind. This was a heavy, deep silence that felt like it was smothering everything. I turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click, just a dead hollow sound. My heart was already starting to thump a little harder. I fumbled for my phone, my hands feeling clumsy. No service. Of course, the little no service text in the corner felt like a personal insult. I sat there for a few minutes, just listening to my own breathing. The car was already starting to feel cold. I knew I couldn't stay there all night. Nobody would come by. This road was deserted after dark. I remembered then that there was a guy, a mechanic, who lived out this way. His place was near the old iron bridge, maybe a mile and a half further up the road. I'd seen his hand-painted sign a few times. It was my only option. The thought of getting out of the car and walking through that darkness made my skin crawl. But the thought of sitting there, a sitting duck in a metal box, felt even worse. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of damp earth and pine. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and my small maglite flashlight from the glove compartment. I made sure the car doors were locked. A pointless gesture that somehow made me feel a tiny bit better, and I started walking. The beam from my flashlight was pathetic. It lit up a small circle of gravel and the first line of trees, but beyond that was just black. I tried to walk fast, my shoes crunching loudly on the gravel. It was the only sound, and that's what got to me first. The silence. It was wrong. This was a forest. There should have been crickets, frogs, the rustle of some small animal in the undergrowth. There was nothing. It was like the woods were holding their breath. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes, my nerves starting to fray at the edges when I heard it. A soft crunch off to my right, inside the tree line. I froze mid-step, my whole body going rigid. I swung the flashlight beam toward the sound. Nothing, just the gnarled trunks of trees and a tangle of bushes, their shadows leaping and dancing in the shaky light. I stood there, not breathing, listening so hard my ears started to ring in the silence. Maybe it was a deer, I told myself. It had to be a deer. My heart was hammering against my ribs now, a frantic drumbeat of pure fear. I forced my feet to move, picking up my pace. I needed to get to that bridge, to that house. The darkness felt like it was getting thicker, heavier. Then I heard it again. This time it was closer, not a delicate crunch like a deer would make, but a heavier, more deliberate sound, a solid thump and the snap of a branch. It wasn't skittering, it was walking. I stopped again, my breath catching in my throat. I slowly, so slowly panned the flashlight to the right again, my hand trembling so badly the beam jittered across the trees, and that's when I saw it. Between two thick pine trees, about 30 feet away, something was standing. It was tall, so much taller than a man. The flashlight beam hit it, and for a second my brain just short-circuited, trying to process what I was seeing. It was covered in hair, a dark, matted brownish black that seemed to absorb the light. It was built, broad across the shoulders, with arms that were too long, hanging down past its knees. But it was the eyes that I will never, ever forget. My flashlight beam caught them, and they reflected back at me. Not like a cat's eyes, green or yellow. These were a faint, dull red, like two dying embers glowing in a pitch-black pit. They weren't animal eyes. They weren't human eyes. They were just wrong. We stood there, frozen. It was looking right at me, and I was looking right at it. Time stopped. That sound people make about their blood running cold, it's real. I felt an icy wave wash down from my head to my feet, leaving my fingers and toes numb. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might be sick. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. All I could do was stare into those two little red pinpricks in the darkness. My mind was screaming, a jumble of words that didn't form coherent thoughts. Bear? No. No bear stands like that. Man in a suit? Don't be stupid. Who would be out here? What is that? What is that? It felt like an eternity. Just that silent, heart-pounding stare down. I was utterly exposed. The beam of my flashlight was the only thing between me and it felt as flimsy as tissue paper. I was just a person, a soft, fragile thing, and this thing in the woods was solid, powerful, and utterly alien. Then it made a sound, a low, guttural grunt that seemed to vibrate right through the ground and up into my bones. It wasn't loud, but it was heavy, full of something I can't describe. A warning, a statement. I don't know. And then it was gone. It didn't run. It didn't turn and crash through the bushes. 1 second it was there, a massive dark shape between the trees, and the next second the space was empty. It just vanished back into the forest, silent as a shadow. The spell broke. A gasp tore out of my lungs, and I stumbled backward, almost falling. My legs were jelly. I fumbled with the flashlight, swinging it wildly around me, expecting to see it everywhere. The woods were still dead silent. The only sound was the ragged, panicked rasp of my own breathing. I didn't think, I just ran. I ran like I've never run before in my life. I didn't care about the dark, about tripping, about anything. Pure, unadulterated terror had taken over. My lungs burned and my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't slow down. I had one thought, one destination. The bridge, the house. I saw the outline of the old iron bridge up ahead and sobbed with relief. Just past it, a faint yellow glow, a porch light. I sprinted toward it, my feet pounding on the wooden planks of the bridge, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. I stumbled up a short gravel driveway to a small, weathered house. There was a pickup truck parked outside, and that beautiful, beautiful porch light. I practically fell onto the porch and started pounding on the door with both fists, not caring if I sounded like a maniac. I was a maniac. I was terrified out of my mind. After a few seconds that felt like hours, the porch light flicked on, and the door creaked open a few inches, a chain lock still in place. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with a worn face and thin grey hair, peered out. He looked tired, and then he saw my face, and his expression shifted to one of sharp concern. "Whoa there, son. You all right?" he asked, his voice gravelly. I couldn't form words. I was just shaking, pointing back toward the road. My car broke down," I finally managed to choke out. "Back there I was walking." He unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. Okay, come on in. You look like you've seen a ghost." I stumbled into his warm, cluttered living room. It smelled like coffee and motor oil. I collapsed into an old armchair he gestured to, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. He didn't say anything, just went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Take your time," he said, pulling up a stool and sitting across from me. He just waited, his eyes calm and steady. I took a few gulps of water, the coldness helping to ground me a little. I knew I had to tell him. I knew how crazy it would sound. I saw something. In the woods, while I was walking, I started, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smirk. He just nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. What did it look like? That simple question, asked with such seriousness, broke something in me. The whole story poured out of me in a rushed, shaky torrent. The silence, the sound, the tall figure, the red eyes, the grunt, the way it vanished. I told him everything, my voice cracking with the effort. When I finished, I just sat there, waiting for him to tell me I was crazy, that it was just a bear, that the dark and my fear had played tricks on me. He was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his hands. Then he looked back up at me, and his eyes were different. They held a knowing, a shared weight. "I believe you," he said, his voice low. "I've lived out here my whole life. I've seen things too, heard things. You learn not to talk about it much. People think you're nuts." That confirmation from a complete stranger was somehow more terrifying than the encounter itself. It meant it was real. It meant I wasn't crazy. He got up. "Let's go get your car. My truck's got a tow hitch." We drove back in his pickup, the cab filled with the smell of old leather and gasoline. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, my eyes glued to the window, scanning the tree line. He didn't say much, just drove with a quiet competence. We found my car, still sitting where I'd left it. He hooked it up to his tow truck rig in the back of his pickup with practiced ease. The whole time I stood by the passenger door of his truck, unable to stand still, my skin crawling with the feeling of being watched. We towed my car back to his place, a small garage attached to the side of his house. He popped the hood, shone a work light on the engine, and poked around for a minute. "Alternator's shot," he grunted. "Lucky for you, I think I've got one that'll fit this model in the shop." He worked for the next couple of hours while I sat on an old crate, wrapped in a blanket he'd given me, just watching him. I was too keyed up to sleep. Every little night sound made me jump. The steady, normal sounds of his tools, the clink of a wrench, the buzz of a ratchet, were the only things keeping me sane. As he worked, the sky began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. Dawn was coming. He finished up, closed the hood, and wiped his hands on a rag. "Try it now." I got in my car, my heart in my throat, and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. The dashboard lights glowed steadily. It was fixed. I got out, my legs still weak. I don't know how to thank you. How much do I owe you?" He shook his head. "For the part, maybe $20. Don't worry about the labor. Consider it a neighborly favor. He gave me a look that said he understood the real cost of the night wasn't the alternator. I handed him the cash from my wallet, my hands finally starting to steady. The sun was just beginning to crest the trees, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. The world was returning to normal, but I knew I never would. I got back in my car. As I pulled out of his driveway, I gave him a final wave. He just stood there on his porch, watching me go, a solitary figure in the growing light. I drove away, the familiar hum of the engine now a comforting sound. But as I passed the spot where I'd broken down, and then the spot where I'd seen it, a cold dread settled deep in my gut, right down in my bones. The woods looked ordinary now in the morning sun, just trees and shadows. But I knew what was in there. I had looked into its eyes. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man. It was something else, something that lived in the deep, quiet places of the world. And it had seen me too, and that certainty, that cold, hard knowledge of something beyond explanation has stayed with me every single day since. Story 6. It was one of those perfect fall days in 1977, the kind that just makes you want to be outside until the very last bit of light is gone. I was 10 years old, and our house was out in the sticks of northwestern Pennsylvania, surrounded by woods that felt like my own personal kingdom. That particular day, a Saturday, I'd been outside since morning, and as the afternoon started to fade into evening, I found myself drawn back into the trees behind our property. I wasn't supposed to go that far, especially not near dusk, but the rule felt flimsy, like most rules did when I was that age. The air had that crisp, cold smell that comes right before the sun goes down, a mix of dead leaves and wet earth. I was wearing a thick flannel shirt, but the chill was starting to bite through it. I remember my sneakers were soaked from an earlier misstep in a creek, and the dampness was making my toes ache. I'd been following this old deer trail for a while, one that cut west from the back road between Route 5 and Route 20. It was a path I knew well, or at least I thought I did. The woods were different at that hour. The familiar, friendly shapes of the trees in daylight became long, stretching shadows that seemed to move on their own. The sounds were different too. The daytime birds had gone quiet, and the night insects hadn't quite started up yet, so everything was wrapped in this heavy, waiting silence. I came to a place where the trail dipped down into a small sand pit. It wasn't a big thing, maybe 10 feet across, probably left over from some long-forgotten digging. The sand was pale and soft, and the sides were steep enough that you had to slide down into it. On a whim, I decided to crouch down in the bottom of it, just to see what it felt like. It was like being in a little fort. The sand was cool and gritty under my palms. I remember picking up a handful and letting it trickle through my fingers, watching the individual grains catch the fading light. I was just sitting there, listening to the absolute quiet, feeling both hidden and completely alone. That's when I heard the first crack. It wasn't a small sound, like a branch breaking underfoot. This was a deep, wet, splintering crunch, the kind of sound a tree makes when it's giving up. It came from maybe 40, 50 yards to my left, deeper in the woods where the trees grew thicker. My whole body went stiff. I stopped breathing, my hand freezing halfway through another trickle of sand. I remember the gritty feeling of it stuck under my fingernails. I craned my neck, trying to peer over the lip of the sand pit, but I couldn't see anything except the dark trunks of the pines. Then there was another sound, a low, guttural grunt. It was a sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't a bear. We had black bears around, and their noises were higher, more nasal. This was deeper, a vibration that I felt in my chest more than I heard with my ears. A cold dread, completely different from the evening chill, started to seep into me. I sank down lower in the pit, making myself as small as possible. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. Slowly, So slowly my neck muscles screamed in protest. I raised my head just enough to see over the edge. And that's when I saw it. It was standing maybe 30 yards away, partly obscured by a cluster of young birch trees. It was huge. I'm not just saying that. I've seen big men, I've seen moose on a family trip to Maine, but this was something else entirely. It had to be over 7 feet tall, and it was built like a refrigerator, but a living, breathing one. It was covered in hair or fur that was just a solid, matted black from its head down to its feet. It didn't look like an ape or a man. It was just its own thing, a massive, dark shape that seemed to suck the remaining light out of the air around it. It had its back to me, and it was focused on a medium-sized pine tree, one that was dead and leaning at an angle. It wrapped one of its arms around the trunk. Its arms were incredibly long, hanging down past its knees. I saw the muscles in its back and shoulders bunch up under that black hair, a ripple of pure power. Then, with what looked like no effort at all, it pushed. There was that sickening crack again, and the whole tree, roots and all, tore out of the ground with a sound of tearing earth. It wasn't just snapping the trunk, it was uprooting the whole thing. It held the tree for a second, like a person might hold a walking stick, and then just tossed it aside. The tree crashed down through the branches of its neighbors, the sound echoing through the quiet woods. I felt a whimper catch in my throat, and I choked it back down, my hand flying up to cover my mouth. The taste of sand and my own sour fear was in my mouth. My eyes were glued to it. I couldn't have looked away if I wanted to. It took a step. Its feet were huge and left deep impressions in the soft forest floor, and it reached for another tree. This one a healthy-looking oak with a thick limb. It grabbed the limb, a branch that was as thick as my whole body, and just tore it off. Not broke it, tore it, like you or I would tear a piece of bread. The sound of the wood fibers ripping apart was brutal, a sharp, snapping tear that made me flinch. It stood there for a moment, holding this huge, leafy branch in its hand. Then it dropped it and let out another one of those low, rumbling grunts. It was just destroying things. There was no reason to it, no purpose I could see. It wasn't building a nest or looking for food. It was just expressing an unbelievable, terrifying strength. The sheer power of it was what scared me the most. That tree it uprooted, a man with an axe would have taken an hour on it. This thing did it in 3 seconds, and that's when the thought hit me. A thought so cold and clear, it felt like a shard of ice in my gut. It had to have known I was there. I had been crashing through the woods for an hour. I'd been laughing to myself, throwing stones, being a loud, clumsy 10-year-old. There was no way something that big, with senses that had to be sharp to live out here, hadn't heard me or smelled me. It knew I was in this sand pit. The realization was like a physical blow. My skin prickled all over, and the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. It was a feeling I'd never had before or since, a pure biological alarm going off in every cell of my body. It wasn't just fear of being seen. It was the fear that I was already seen, that I had been watched this whole time, and it was just choosing to ignore me for the moment. What if it stopped ignoring me? What if it turned around? I could see its profile now as it shifted. It had a heavy, sloping brow, and its head seemed to sit directly on its massive shoulders with almost no neck. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel a presence, an awareness that was ancient and completely wild. This wasn't an animal you could scare away by shouting or throwing a rock. This was something that belonged here, and I was the intruder. The woods, my familiar playground, had suddenly become its territory, and I was hiding in a hole in the ground, hoping it wouldn't decide to come and check on the noise I'd made. It took another step, and its head turned just a little. I froze, my body pressing down into the sand, trying to become part of the earth. I stopped thinking. I stopped breathing. All I could do was feel the cold sand beneath me and the thunder of my own heart. I was certain it was looking right at me. I could feel its gaze, a heavy, palpable pressure. The grunting had stopped. The destruction had stopped. The only sound was the blood roaring in my ears. This was it. It was going to come for me. That thought broke the paralysis. A surge of pure, undiluted adrenaline shot through me. I didn't make a decision to run. My body just did it. I scrambled up the side of the sandpit, my hands and feet digging, slipping, sending cascades of sand down behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I burst out of the pit and onto the deer trail, and I ran. I have never run like that in my life, before or since. It wasn't a run. It was a frantic, blind sprint. My wet sneakers pounded on the hard-packed dirt of the trail. I could hear my own ragged, gasping breaths, but I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't know if it was following me. I didn't dare to check. The 50 yards back down that trail felt like a mile. Every shadow was a hand reaching out for me. Every rustle of leaves was its footsteps gaining on me. I expected to feel a massive, hairy hand close around my neck at any second. I burst out of the tree line into the open field that separated the woods from our house. The field was overgrown with tall, dead grass that whipped at my legs as I ran. The 100 yards across that field was the longest distance I have ever had to cross. The lights from our house windows were like beacons, but they seemed impossibly far away. My lungs were on fire, burning with the cold air. I was gulping down. My legs felt like rubber, threatening to buckle with every step. I kept running, my arms pumping, my whole world narrowed down to the back porch light of my house. I didn't scream, I couldn't. All my energy was focused on moving forward. I finally hit the gravel of our driveway, my ankles twisting on the loose stones, but I didn't fall. I slammed into the back door, fumbling for the knob, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it. I fell into the kitchen, the warmth and the smell of my mum's meatloaf hitting me like a wall. I was gasping, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to get air into my starved lungs. My mum was at the stove. She turned around and her face changed from a smile to a look of alarm. "What in the world is wrong with you?" she asked. "You're white as a ghost." I tried to speak, to tell her about the huge black thing in the woods, about the trees, about the power. But all that came out were ragged, hiccuping sobs. I just pointed a trembling finger back towards the woods. My dad came in from the living room asking what all the racket was about. I remember the feeling of his rough hands on my shoulders, trying to steady me. I was crying uncontrollably, the fear finally releasing itself in a torrent I couldn't control. I kept saying, "In the woods, a monster. It was breaking trees." They exchanged a look, the look parents share when they think their kid has let their imagination run away with them. My dad put on his coat and took a flashlight out onto the back porch. I stood there, shivering in the warm kitchen, watching him through the window. He shone the light out across the field towards the dark line of trees. He stood there for a minute, then came back in, stamping his feet. "Nothing out there, son," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Probably just a bear. You know how they can get. Knocking over rotten logs looking for grubs. It can sound scary." I shook my head, the motion violent. "No, it wasn't a bear. It was bigger. It was standing up. It tore a tree out of the ground." They humored me, told me to wash up for dinner, that I'd just had a scare, but I knew what I saw. The memory of its sheer size, the effortless, terrifying strength, the way the hair on my neck stood up, that wasn't a bear. That was something else, something that shouldn't exist. I didn't go back into those woods for 6 months, not to play, not to explore, not for anything. I wouldn't even take the trash out to the bin at the edge of the yard if it was getting dark. For weeks, I had nightmares where I'd be back in that sand pit, and it would turn around and I still couldn't see its face, just a dark, powerful presence that knew I was there. The feeling of being watched by something that powerful, something that could have ended me without a second thought, never really left me. I'm a grown man now, have been for a long time, but I still get a cold chill down my spine when I think about that fall evening in 1977, crouched in a sandpit, watching something I still can't explain tear a forest apart. Story 7. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never written it down before, and I don't talk about it much. When I do, people get this look in their eyes like I'm either crazy or making it up for attention. I'm not. This happened. It was Thursday, September 1st, 2011. I remember the date because it was the day after my buddy's birthday, and we decided to go camping to celebrate, just the two of us, no big party. We were up in the Cascade Mountains in Washington, in this little dispersed camping spot my friend knew about. It wasn't a proper campground, just a pull-off from a gravel Forest Service road. You had to know it was there. The air had that crisp, clean smell you only get way up in the mountains, a mix of pine needles and cold dirt. We'd set up our tent in this small clearing surrounded by these massive old-growth trees that made everything feel quiet and heavy, even in the afternoon. The day had been normal, perfect even. We fished in a nearby creek, didn't catch anything, but it didn't matter. We made a fire, cooked some burgers, drank a few beers, just two guys hanging out. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. 1 minute you're comfortable in a hoodie, the next you're zipping up your jacket and wishing you'd brought a warmer hat. The dark up there isn't like city dark. It's a thick black blanket that smothers everything. Our fire was the only point of light for what felt like miles, and the circle it lit was so small, just our tent, our cooler, and our two camp chairs. Beyond that, it was just nothing. A wall of black. We'd been sitting by the fire for maybe an hour after full dark, just talking about work and life, the usual stuff, when I realized I had to take a leak. I stood up, my joints stiff from the cold, and grabbed my small, cheap flashlight. The beam was weak, just a little cone of yellow light that didn't do much against the absolute dark. "Gonna water the trees," I said to my friend. "Don't get lost," he joked, his voice sounding small against the silence. I walked away from the fire, the light from it fading quickly at my back. The plan was just to go to the edge of the trees, maybe 20 yards from camp. But as I was standing there, I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a low, guttural grunt. It didn't sound like a bear. I'd heard bears before. This was deeper, with a weird resonance to it, like it was coming from a much bigger chest. It came from across the creek, which was about 50 feet away from our camp, on the other side of a rickety old footbridge. The bridge was just a few planks of wood with a single rope handrail, the kind that sways when you step on it. On the other side of the bridge was a pipe gate, the kind they used to block off old logging roads. It was just a yellow metal bar across the road, and it had a little red reflector on it. I stood there, my breath making little clouds in the flashlight beam, and I stared across the bridge. The sound didn't come again, but I felt this pull, a stupid, reckless curiosity. I wanted to see what was over there. Maybe it was the beer, maybe it was just the weirdness of the sound. But I decided to cross the bridge, just to take a quick look. I told myself I'd just go to the gate and come right back. I stepped onto the bridge. The wood creaked under my boots, a loud, complaining sound in the quiet. The creek below was just a whisper, a soft gurgling over rocks. My flashlight beam danced on the planks as I walked. I remember feeling the cold seep up through the soles of my boots. I reached the other side, and my beam immediately landed on the red reflector of the gate. It was about 30 feet away, and then I saw it. The reflector wasn't shining back, it was blocked. Something was standing right in front of the gate. My heart just froze in my chest. I stopped dead, my feet feeling rooted to the ground. I angled my flashlight up, my hand trembling so hard the beam shook. It was a figure, a massive dark shape, blacker than the blackness around it. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing me, and its eyes, they were wide set, and they were a bright, glowing yellow, not like an animal's eye shine, which is usually a green or a dull red. This was a sharp, intelligent yellow, like two small, malevolent suns. The most terrifying part, the part that sent a cold jolt straight down my spine, was their height. I'm 5'8". These eyes were level with mine. But the thing was standing on the other side of the gate, which was on a slight incline. For its eyes to be level with mine from over there, it had to be huge. I'm talking 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was towering over me even from a distance. We just stared at each other. My brain was screaming, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand that straight, and they don't have eyes like that. This thing was bipedal, built like a man, but impossibly broad and thick. The darkness clung to it, hiding details, but I could see the sheer bulk of its shoulders, the outline of a powerful barrel-shaped chest. The staring contest felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10, maybe 12 seconds. My whole body was locked up, a statue of pure fear. I couldn't move, I could barely breathe, and then it moved. It started to sway, very slowly, side to side, like a tree in a gentle wind. It was a smooth, rhythmic motion that was utterly unnatural for something that big. And as it swayed, its eyes, they lowered. They didn't just look down, they lowered in a slow, deliberate circular motion, like it was tracing a circle on the ground between us with its gaze. And then they came back up to meet mine. That was the breaking point, that circular motion of the eyes. It was too deliberate, too conscious. It wasn't an animal gesture, it felt like a signal, a challenge, something I was supposed to understand but didn't. The spell broke. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I just moved. I sprinted back across that bridge, my feet slamming on the wood, the rope rail whipping past my hand. I didn't look back. I just ran straight for the firelight, my lungs burning with the cold air and panic. I burst into the circle of light, skidding to a stop. My friend was still in his chair, and he saw my face. I must have been white as a ghost, my eyes wide. "Dude, what's wrong?" he said, standing up. I was gasping for air, bent over with my hands on my knees. There's something over there," I managed to choke out. "By the gate. A thing. It's huge." He didn't laugh. He saw I was genuinely terrified. An animal? A bear? No, not a bear. It was standing up. It had yellow eyes. My voice was shaking. We stood there for a second listening. The forest was silent. Not even the crickets were chirping. It was a dead, watchful silence. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. "We need to go look," my friend said, his voice low and serious. He grabbed his flashlight, a big, heavy mag light that could double as a club. I picked up my pathetic little light again, my hands still trembling. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We can't just sit here not knowing," he said. "We'll just go to the bridge. We won't cross." We walked back towards the creek, our 2 flashlight beams cutting shaky paths through the dark. My whole body was tense, every muscle ready to bolt. The fire was behind us again, and the darkness felt even thicker this time, more menacing. We could hear the creek now, and it sounded louder, more frantic. We got to our side of the bridge and stopped. We both shone our lights across. The pipe gate was there. The red reflector was visible now, winking in the light. There was nothing blocking it. "See? Nothing there," my friend said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was scanning the trees beyond the gate with his light, and then we saw it. Movement. Back in the trees, maybe 100 feet past the gate. Something was moving. It was walking. It was hard to see because it was so dark and it moved between the trees, but we could see the shape, a huge, dark, 2-legged shape, pacing. It wasn't running. It was walking with a slow, deliberate, heavy gait. Each step looked like it had weight and power behind it. It was coming towards the bridge, towards us. "Oh my God," my friend whispered. The fear in his voice confirmed I wasn't crazy. He saw it too. We stood there, frozen again, our lights trained on it. It kept walking, getting closer to the edge of the trees, closer to the gate. It was going to come out into the open. "Shine your light on its face," my friend said, his voice tight. As it stepped out from behind the last big tree and into the small clearing before the gate, we both aimed our beams at it. For one single, horrifying second, the light caught its face. It was massive. The head was conical, almost like a giant misshapen peanut, and it was covered in dark hair, but the face was mostly flat, with a prominent brow ridge, and it was just huge. The proportions were all wrong. The eyes, now reflecting a duller version of that terrifying yellow, were sunk deep under that brow. The mouth was a dark line. It wasn't a human face. It wasn't an ape's face. It was something else, something primal and ancient and deeply, deeply wrong. It turned its head slightly, and its eyes seemed to look directly into our flashlight beams, right at us. It didn't flinch. It didn't seem startled by the light. It just looked. That was it. That was all we could take. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. We both turned at the exact same moment and ran. We ran like our lives depended on it. I've never run so fast in my life. We crashed through the underbrush, our flashlight beams jerking wildly, illuminating flashes of tree trunks and ferns. We didn't stop until we were back at the fire, panting, our chests heaving. We just looked at each other, our faces pale and slick with sweat despite the cold. We have to go. Now, my friend said. I just nodded. We didn't pack anything. We didn't douse the fire. We just grabbed our car keys, jumped in the truck, and peeled out of there, the tires spitting gravel. We drove down that mountain road in the dark, not speaking, just listening to the sound of the engine and our own ragged breathing. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those yellow eyes glowing in the darkness behind us. We didn't stop until we hit the first gas station with lights on, miles down the road. We sat in the truck in that bright artificial light for a long time, just trying to calm down. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times, the way it stood there, the way it swayed, that slow, circular lowering of its eyes, the sheer size of it when we saw it walking, the brief, shocking glimpse of that face. I can't explain it. I don't know what it was. People talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever. I don't know about any of that. I just know what I saw, and the weirdest part, the part that has stuck with me all these years and fuels this desire to go back, is that it didn't feel aggressive. It felt curious. It felt like it was studying us. That first stare, it was an assessment. The slow walk towards us was a deliberate approach, not a charge. It wanted to get a closer look. We left everything at that campsite. The tent, the sleeping bags, the cooler, all of it. We went back 2 days later with 2 other guys in the middle of the day to get our stuff. Everything was exactly as we left it, including the cold, dead fire. There were no tracks we could find, nothing. It was just gone. But I know it was there. I saw it. And sometimes, late at night, I get this urge. I look at maps of the Cascades. I research better gear, night vision, trail cameras. I want to go back. I need to go back. Not for revenge. Not to prove anything to anyone else. I need to go back because I have to know. I have to look into those yellow eyes again and finally understand what I saw standing in the dark on the other side of that bridge. Story 8. The day had been brutally hot and sticky, the kind of Missouri humidity that makes your clothes cling to your skin and the air feel heavy, like you're breathing through a wet blanket. By the time evening rolled around, it hadn't cooled off much. We were all sitting around after supper, trying to catch whatever breeze we could. My aunt had all the doors and windows wide open, hoping to get some cross-ventilation going. I remember the screen door was unlatched, just swinging gently if the wind picked up, and the sheer curtains in the living room were billowing a little, looking almost ghostly in the dim light from the lamps. My mother was chatting with my aunt about family stuff, and my sister was half asleep on the couch, her head in Mom's lap. I was lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling fan as it wobbled slowly, not doing much except stirring the hot air around. The sounds of the night were all around us, crickets chirping, frogs croaking from the pond out back, the occasional rustle of leaves. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you feel safe and sleepy. But that didn't last. It was right around 10 o'clock when it started. I know because I just glanced at the big grandfather clock in the hallway, its pendulum swinging back and forth with a steady tick-tock. Out of nowhere, this sound cut through the night, a scream, but not like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't human, not even close. It was deep and guttural, like something torn from the throat of a beast, and it echoed off the hills behind the house. My whole body went cold, even in the heat. I sat up straight, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The scream came again, closer this time. It sounded like it was moving, starting from the hill and coming down toward the house. My aunt froze, her eyes wide. She didn't say a word, just stood up and went straight for the shotgun she kept leaning in the corner by the door. My mother jumped into action too, her face pale. She slammed the front door shut and bolted it, then yelled at us to get into the living room. I grabbed my sister's hand. She was crying softly now, scared, and we huddled together on the floor near the couch. The living room had these big windows with sheer curtains, the kind you can kind of see through if the light's right. Outside, it was pitch black, but the porch light was on, casting a weak yellow glow that didn't reach far. We could hear footsteps now, heavy and slow, crunching on the gravel path that led around the side of the house. Whatever it was big. The sound of its steps was like someone dropping sacks of grain, one after another, but with a weight that made the floorboards under us vibrate slightly. Then we saw it. Through the sheer curtains, a shape moved into view. It was hunched over, but still tall, I'd guess 7 feet or more, with a frame that was wide and powerful looking. It wasn't a person, I knew that right away. The outline was all wrong, too bulky and awkward, like it was built for strength, not speed. It paused right outside the window, and I could see the silhouette of its head, sort of rounded, but with no distinct features, just a dark mass against the night. My breath caught in my throat. I was shaking, my hands gripping the edge of the rug so hard my knuckles hurt. The creature didn't make a sound for a moment, just stood there, and I could feel it looking in at us. The air in the room felt thick with fear. I could smell the sweat on my own skin, mixed with the faint scent of my aunt's perfume and the dusty smell of the old farmhouse. My mother had her arms around my sister and me, holding us tight, and I could feel her trembling too. My aunt was crouched by the door, the shotgun pointed toward the window, but her hands were shaking so bad I didn't know if she could even fire it. Then it happened. The thing outside let out another scream, this one right up against the house. It was so loud, it felt like it was inside my head, a raw, piercing noise that made my ears ring. At the same time, it slammed into the side of the house. The whole place shook. I'm not exaggerating. The walls rattled, and a picture frame fell off the mantel with a crash. Plaster dust sifted down from the ceiling, and I felt the vibration through the floor, up into my bones. My sister screamed, a high-pitched cry that got lost in the noise. For a second, everything was chaos. My aunt shouted something, but I couldn't make out the words over the ringing in my ears. My mother, in a burst of what I now think was pure adrenaline, got up and ran to the door. I don't know why she did it, maybe to see if it was gone, or to try and scare it off. She unbolted the door and cracked it open just a few inches. That's when she saw it. Later, she told us she saw a leg, thick and covered in dark, matted hair, like a bear's but longer and more tangled. It was only for a split second, but she said it was massive, with a foot that looked almost human but too big, splayed out on the ground. As soon as she opened the door, the thing screamed back at her. This scream was different, shorter, more of a roar, like it was angry or challenged. The sound was so close it made the door vibrate, and I could feel it in my chest, a deep thrum that left me breathless. Then just like that, it was gone. The footsteps retreated, heavy and fast this time, fading into the woods behind the house. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. It was heavy, pressing down on us, broken only by my sister's sobs and the ragged sound of our breathing, but it left something behind. a smell. It hit us like a wave, a burning skunk-like stench that was so strong it made my eyes water. It wasn't just bad, it was unnatural, like something rotting mixed with chemicals and wet fur. The odor seeped into the house through the crack in the door, and even after Mom shut it and locked it again, the smell lingered. We could taste it in the air, metallic and foul, and it made me want to gag. I remember covering my nose with my shirt, but it didn't help much. My aunt, still holding the shotgun, went outside to look around. She was brave, I'll give her that. She took a flashlight and swept it over the yard, but there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing but that awful smell hanging in the humid air. She came back inside after a few minutes, her face grim, and said she couldn't find a trace of whatever it was. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, too scared to move or sleep. The adults tried to calm us down, saying it might have been a bear or a large animal, but I knew better. I'd seen that outline, heard that scream. It wasn't any animal I'd ever heard of. The memory of that night is burned into my brain, vivid and unsettling. Even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and see that hunched figure through the curtains, feel the house shake, smell that burning stench. It's why I've never doubted that Bigfoot is real. Whatever was out there that night, it was something beyond what we understand, and it left me with a fear of the dark and the woods that I've never quite shaken. Sometimes, on hot summer nights, I'll catch a whiff of something similar, and my heart will start racing all over again. I don't talk about it much, because people might think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. That terror was real, and it's a part of me, forever. Story 9. That night, we'd been out there since just after sunset, around 7 or so, hoping to catch some catfish. The heat hadn't let up much, even after dark, and the humidity made my shirt cling to my back like it was glued on. We were sitting on this old wooden dock that jutted out into the water, with a couple of lanterns set up to see what we were doing. The dock light was one of those yellowy ones that attracts bugs, and it cast this eerie glow over the water, making the surface look like oily black glass. We had our rods propped up on makeshift stands, and between us was a bait bucket full of chicken livers and stink bait, the kind that reeks but the catfish go nuts for. The bucket was right by our feet, a beat-up plastic thing we'd been using for years. For the first few hours, it was just a normal night. We'd caught a couple of decent-sized channel cats, nothing huge, but enough to keep us interested. The sounds were what you'd expect. Frogs croaking from the reeds, the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface, and the buzz of insects swarming around the light. Every now and then, we'd hear something rustling in the trees behind us, but that was normal, probably raccoons or possums nosing around. We'd brought a cooler with some beers, and we were just shooting the shit, talking about work, life, the usual stuff. I remember feeling relaxed, but also kind of on edge because it was so isolated out there. The bayou is dense with cypress trees and Spanish moss, and at night it feels like you're in another world, cut off from everything. Then, around 10:30, things started to get weird. I was reeling in a line to check the bait when I noticed these large ripples in the water beyond the dock light. At first I thought it was a big fish, or maybe a gator. We get those sometimes, but these ripples were different. They were slow and deliberate, like something was moving just under the surface, but not in a way that felt natural. I nudged my buddy and pointed, and we both leaned forward to get a better look. The water was dark, but the light from the dock made it possible to see maybe 10 feet out. That's when I saw it, a thick, hairy arm emerging from the water, gripping the edge of the dock with these massive fingers. I'm not talking about a bear or anything. I've seen bears, and this wasn't that. The fingers were long and thick, with dirt caked under the nails, and the hair was matted and dark, almost black from being wet. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I froze, and I could feel my buddy tense up beside me. We didn't say anything at first. We just stared, like if we moved it might notice us. Then the creature started to rise out of the water, and I swear, I've never been so terrified in my life. It was huge, over 8 feet tall, with a broad chest and shoulders that looked like they could bench press a car. Its body was covered in wet, matted dark brown hair, but as it hauled itself up, water poured off it, and I could see patches of leathery, dark grey skin underneath. The hair was clumped in places, like it had been submerged for a while, and it smelled, this musky, earthy odor that hit me like a wall. Its head was sloped, with a heavy brow ridge, and its eyes were deep set and glowed faintly red in the dim light. Not like demon red, but more like the reflection you'd see in an animal's eyes at night, only deeper and more intelligent. It knelt on the dock, and the wood creaked under its weight. Water dripped from its body, pooling around its knees, and I could hear its breathing, a low, wet grunt that sounded like it was coming from deep in its chest. My own breath caught in my throat, and I felt cold sweat trickle down my back. I was shaking, but I couldn't look away. Its eyes locked onto us, and that's when the real fear set in. It wasn't a blank stare. It felt like it was studying us, taking us in. There was an intelligence there that I can't explain. It wasn't just some dumb animal. It felt curious, almost cautious, like it was as surprised to see us as we were to see it. Then it moved. Slowly, it reached out with one of those massive hands toward the bait bucket near our feet. Its fingers were easily twice the size of mine, and when it wrapped them around the bucket, the plastic crumpled like it was made of paper. There was this crunching sound, and then a low grunt as it squeezed, and the bucket just collapsed. Chicken livers and stink bait oozed out, and the smell mixed with that musky odor from the creature, making me feel sick to my stomach. For a second, it just held the crushed bucket, looking at it, then at us. Its eyes seemed to narrow, and I thought, this is it, we're dead. But then, without any warning, it dropped back into the water with a deep splash that sent waves rocking the dock. It vanished beneath the surface, and within seconds the ripples faded, and it was like it had never been there. We didn't move for what felt like forever. I was still frozen, my legs like jelly, and I could hear my buddy breathing heavily beside me. The night sounds had stopped. No frogs, no insects, just silence. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Did that just happen?" And my buddy just nodded, his face pale in the lantern light. We both scrambled to our feet, grabbing our gear, and practically ran back to the truck. I don't even remember packing up. We just threw everything in the bed and peeled out of there, driving too fast on those dirt roads, not saying a word the whole way back. The next morning, we went back to the bayou. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to ourselves that it was real, or maybe because we were too scared not to. The sun was up and everything looked normal. But when we got to the dock, we saw the evidence. There was a handprint on the wooden planks where it had gripped the edge, measuring about 10 by 16 inches. The fingers were clearly defined, with deep impressions, and the wood was slightly splintered. In the mud along the bank, we found footprints, huge, with a stride of about 5 feet between them. They were deep, like whatever made them was heavy, and the shape was human-like but broader, with toes that splayed out, and the bait bucket was there, crushed flat, the plastic twisted and broken. We took some photos with a disposable camera we had in the truck, but they didn't come out great, too blurry. Later that day, we drove into town and reported it to a local deputy. He listened, but you could tell he thought we were drunk or pulling a prank. He said it was probably a bear or someone messing with us, but bears don't leave handprints that size, and no human could have made those strides. He didn't have an explanation, and we left feeling even more unsettled. After that, we never went back to that bayou. The dock eventually collapsed a few years later, washed out in a storm, but the memory of that night has stuck with me. I still dream about it sometimes, the way it looked at us, the intelligence in its eyes, the sheer size of it. My buddy and I don't talk about it much anymore. It's like an unspoken agreement that it's too raw to bring up. But every now and then, I'll hear a story from someone else in the area about strange noises or sightings, and it sends a chill down my spine. Whatever it was, it felt like it belonged there, like we were the intruders. I can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. Story 10. All right, so this happened about 3 years ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've told a couple of close friends, but nobody really gets it unless they've been through something like this themselves. That's why I'm writing it down here. Maybe putting it into words will help me make sense of it, or at least stop it from rattling around in my head so much. It was a late September morning, and I'd decided to go hunting out at the Valley Center Flood Control Project in Kansas. I'd been there plenty of times before. It's this big open area with a stream running through the middle, surrounded by rolling hills and patches of thick brush. I know the place like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. That day, I was after rabbits. I'd gotten up early around 5 in the morning, loaded up my gear, and drove out there just as the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. The air was cool and damp, and a low fog had settled in, making everything look kind of hazy and unreal. It was one of those days where you feel alone in the world, but in a good way, you know? Peaceful. I parked my truck off the main road and hiked in, following a trail I'd used a dozen times. The ground was soft from recent rains, and my boots squelched in the mud with every step. I could hear birds chirping somewhere off in the distance, but otherwise it was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I remember thinking that as I walked, but I shrugged it off. I was focused on finding rabbits. I had my .22 rifle with me, nothing too fancy, just something for small game. I'd brought a thermos of coffee too, and I took a sip now and then to keep warm. The fog was thick enough that I couldn't see more than 100 yards ahead, and it clung to my clothes, making me feel damp and chilly. I spent the first couple of hours moving slowly through the brush, scanning for any sign of rabbits. I'd see a flicker of movement now and then, but it was always just a bird or a squirrel, nothing worth taking a shot at. I started to get frustrated. I'd been looking forward to this trip all week, and now it felt like a waste of time. By mid-morning, I'd had no luck at all, so I decided to switch to dove hunting. I figured maybe I'd have better luck with birds, since they tend to flock near the water. The stream was nearby, so I made my way over to a spot where the brush was tall and thick, perfect for concealing myself. I found a good hiding place in a cluster of weeds and tall grass that came up to my chest. I crouched down, making sure I was well hidden, and settled in to wait. The air was still foggy, and it made everything feel close and intimate, like the world had shrunk down to just me and this little patch of land. I could hear the stream gurgling softly downstream, maybe a quarter mile away. It was a soothing sound, and for a while I just sat there, listening and watching the sky for doves. My legs started to cramp from crouching, and I shifted my weight trying to get comfortable. I remember the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves, mixed with the faint scent of my own sweat. It was all so normal, so routine. Then I heard it, a splashing sound from downstream. At first I thought it might be a deer or something, maybe crossing the stream. I've seen deer out here before, and they're not uncommon. But this sounded different. It wasn't the gentle splashing of an animal wading through water. It was louder, more deliberate, like someone was slapping the surface with their hands. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, listening hard. The splashing kept up, rhythmic and steady. It was coming from the same direction as the stream, and it was getting a little louder, like whatever it was might be moving closer. I felt a prickle of fear run down my spine. I'm not usually a jumpy person. I've spent enough time in the woods to know most sounds are harmless. But this felt off. I slowly peered out from the brush, trying to see through the fog. The visibility was crap, but I could make out the general area where the sound was coming from, and then I saw it. About a quarter mile away, there was something in the water. At first, it was just a dark shape, but as I stared, my eyes started to adjust. It was a creature, maybe 5.5 to 6 feet tall, and it was splashing the water with its front hand, or what looked like a hand. It was moving its arm up and down, slapping the surface, and water was flying everywhere. My breath caught in my throat. I felt cold all over, like I'd been dunked in ice water. This wasn't a deer or a bear. I've seen both, and this was different. It was humanoid, but covered in short black hair. The hair was matted and wet from the water, and it gleamed dully in the faint light. I could see its broad shoulders and a powerful-looking torso. It was crouched low, so I couldn't get a full sense of its size. But then it did something that made my blood run cold. It rose up on its hind legs, standing fully upright. That's when the terror really hit me. I've never felt fear like that in my life. It was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The creature stood there, tall and straight, and I could see its proportions clearly. It wasn't lanky or awkward like a gorilla. It was fit and well-built, almost muscular, with arms that hung down to its mid-thigh. Its head was rounded with no visible neck, and I couldn't make out any facial features from that distance, just a dark, shadowy shape. But I knew it was looking around, because its head moved slowly from side to side. The splashing had stopped, and now it was just standing there, silent and still, except for that slight head movement. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, just watching. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a minute or two. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my hands were shaking. I had my rifle, but the thought of using it never even crossed my mind. This thing wasn't something I wanted to shoot at. I just wanted to get away. But part of me was curious too. What the hell was it? I've heard stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I always brushed them off as nonsense. Now, faced with this, I wasn't so sure. I forced myself to think logically. I needed to get a closer look, but I had to be careful. I remembered reading somewhere that these kinds of creatures might have a keen sense of smell, so I checked the wind. It was blowing from the south toward me, which meant my scent might carry in that direction. If this thing could smell me, it might know I was here. That thought sent another wave of fear through me. I decided to move north, away from the wind, and try to get to a higher vantage point. There's a cliff overlook on the north side of the stream that gives a clear view of the area where I'd seen it. Moving was agony. Every step felt too loud, and I was hyper-aware of every crunch of leaves under my feet. I kept low, staying in the brush as much as possible, and my eyes were glued to the spot where the creature had been. It was still standing there, motionless, and I couldn't tell if it had seen me or not. The fog was still thick, which helped hide me, but it also made everything feel more sinister, like I was in a horror movie. I've never been so aware of my own body. The way my muscles tensed, the cold sweat on my forehead, the way my breath came in shallow gasps. I could feel the dampness of the fog seeping into my clothes, making me shiver. I reached the stream and had to cross it. The water was shallow, only up to my ankles, but it was icy cold. I stepped carefully, trying not to make any noise, and the water soaked through my boots, numbing my feet. On the other side, the ground sloped upward toward the cliff. I climbed slowly, using my hands to steady myself on rocks and roots. My rifle was slung over my shoulder, and it kept bumping against my back, a constant reminder of how unprepared I felt. I should have brought a camera or something, but who thinks of that when they're just going hunting? When I finally reached the top of the cliff, I was breathing heavily, more from fear than exertion. I crouched behind a large rock and peered over the edge, down into the area where I'd seen the creature. My heart was in my throat. I expected to see it still there, maybe looking up at me, but the spot was empty. Nothing. Just the stream, the fog, and the quiet. I scanned the area, my eyes darting back and forth, but there was no sign of it. It had vanished, like it was never there. The emptiness was almost worse than seeing it. I felt a deep, gnawing dread in my gut. Where did it go? How could something that big just disappear? The fog made it hard to see far, but I should have been able to spot it if it was still in the area. I stayed there for what felt like a long time, maybe 20 minutes, just watching and listening. But there was nothing. No sounds, no movement. The only thing I could hear was the stream and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I started to feel exposed up on the cliff, like I was being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this overwhelming urge to get out of there. I didn't wait around any longer. I scrambled down from the cliff, my hands shaking so bad I almost slipped a couple of times. I crossed the stream again, not even bothering to be quiet now, and hurried back toward my truck. I didn't look back. I just wanted to be gone. The hike back felt twice as long as the hike in. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound made me jump. I kept expecting to see that dark shape emerge from the fog, but it never did. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my gear in the back and got in, locking the doors behind me. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to calm down. My hands were still trembling, and I had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. What had I seen? Was it a bear? But bears don't stand upright like that for long, and they're not that proportional. This thing looked almost human, but not quite. The short black hair, the fit build, it didn't match any animal I know, and the way it vanished so quickly, it didn't make sense. I've replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times since then, and I still have no explanation. The fog that day made everything feel surreal, and maybe that played a part in it, but I know what I saw. I've been back to that spot a couple of times since, but never alone and never for long. I always get this uneasy feeling like I'm being watched. I never saw the creature again, and part of me is glad, but another part wonders what it was doing there, splashing in the water like that. It looked almost playful, which is creepy in its own way. To this day, I can't shake the fear. It's not just the memory, it's the knowledge that there are things out there that we don't understand. Things that can vanish into the fog and leave you questioning everything. I never told anyone in detail until now, because who would believe me? But it happened, and sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I can still see it standing there, tall and dark, and I feel that same cold terror all over again. Story 11. This was a Tuesday night. I remember that clearly, the first week of October. It was cold, a real bite in the air that promised frost by morning. My old Ford pickup was humming along, the heater blasting, and I had the radio on low just for some company. There were no other headlights, just me and this tunnel of darkness, my own headlights carved out of the night. The trees were thick on both sides, walls of blackness pressing in. I was maybe 20 minutes from home on a particularly lonely stretch of gravel road called Bass Lake Road. When it happened, it wasn't a scrape or a bump. It was a loud, solid thump on the passenger side of the truck. It was so hard the whole truck shuddered, like someone had swung a sledgehammer into the door. My heart just launched into my throat. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding a little on the loose gravel. For a second, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I thought I'd hit a deer. That was the only logical thing, but I hadn't seen any eyes in the headlights, and the impact felt too high up, like it was on the body of the truck, not the bumper. The silence after was the worst part, just the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine and my own ragged breathing. I looked out the passenger window, but it was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. My mind was racing. Maybe a deer was lying in the road, hurt. I had to check. I didn't want to, but I had to. I fumbled for the interior dome light and clicked it on, which just made the darkness outside feel even thicker. I took my phone out of my pocket, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I opened the door, and the cold air hit me like a physical slap. I stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel, and I shone my phone's flashlight at the passenger side. There was no dead deer. There was no blood. There was nothing in the road at all, but there, running from the back of the cab all the way down to the rear wheel well, were 4 long, deep scratches in the blue paint. They weren't random, they were parallel, like 4 fingers had just dragged themselves down the metal. They were so deep I could see the silvery primer underneath. My blood ran cold. This wasn't from a branch. There were no low-hanging branches on this road, and it wasn't from an animal brushing against me. This was something that had taken a swipe at my truck as I was driving. Something big. A wave of pure, undiluted fear washed over me. I felt exposed, standing there in that little bubble of light. The woods around me felt alive, watching. I scrambled back into the truck, locking the doors and hitting the central lock button again, just to hear the reassuring thunk. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I couldn't stay here, but the idea of driving further down this dark road, not knowing what was out there, was even worse. I called my dad. My voice was shaking so much I could barely get the words out. "Dad," I said, "something hit my truck. I'm on Bass Lake Road, just past the old Miller farm. There are scratches. Can you and Mike come get me? I can't. I don't want to drive alone." He heard the panic in my voice. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He just said, "Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. We're on our way." The 15 minutes it took for them to arrive were some of the longest of my life. I sat there trying to breathe, constantly scanning the tree line with my phone light. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves in the wind made me jump. I kept looking at those scratches on the door. They were high. To make marks that high, whatever did it had to be tall. Really tall. Finally, I saw the twin beams of my dad's SUV coming up behind me. The relief was so intense, it felt like my bones were turning to water. I got out as he pulled up. My dad is a big, practical guy, a retired mechanic. He doesn't spook easily. My brother Mike, he's younger, more impulsive. He hopped out, already hyped up. "You okay?" my dad asked, his voice steady. He gave me a quick hug. "I'm just freaked out," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the scratches on my door. He walked over and ran his fingers along the grooves, his brow furrowed. "Jesus," he muttered. "What the hell did that?" "That's what I'm saying," I said, my voice rising. It wasn't a deer, it was a thump. And then this. Mike was already shining his own, much more powerful flashlight around. "Maybe it was some asshole with a crowbar," he suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. There were no houses for miles. Then he stopped. "Hey, look at this." He was pointing his beam at the road. The gravel was thin in the center, worn down to hard-packed dirt, and in that dirt there were footprints. They weren't human. I mean, they were bipedal. They walked on 2 feet, but that's where the similarity ended. They were huge, easily twice the size of my dad's size 12 boot. The shape was all wrong too. They were long, with a very wide ball and a narrow heel. They pressed deep into the earth like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. The footprints started right near where my truck was parked, and they went straight down the exact middle of the road, disappearing into the darkness ahead of us. We all just stood there for a second, silent. The only sound was the wind sighing through the pines. "Bear?" my dad said. But it was a question, not a statement. We all know what bear tracks look like. These weren't them. "Let's get a picture," Mike said. Always the one with a plan. He pulled out his phone and started taking photos of the tracks, then of the scratches on my truck. I did the same, my hands still unsteady. It felt important to document this, to have proof that we weren't just losing our minds. We were so focused on the phones huddled together that we didn't hear it at first. It was a soft, crushing sound, like something heavy stepping on dry leaves and twigs. It came from the field to our left, a wide open space that used to be a cornfield, but was now just tall, dead weeds. We all froze. My dad slowly raised his flashlight, the big maglite he always keeps in his car, and swept the beam across the field. The light hit the tree line at the far edge, about 100 yards away, and in the bushes, right at the border between the field and the woods, 2 points of light reflected back. They were green, a bright, sickly, electric green. They were too high off the ground to be a coyote or a deer. They were just eyes, unblinking, staring right at us. My breath caught in my chest. I couldn't move. And then Mike, stupid, brave, idiot Mike, he just took off. Mike, no! My dad and I both yelled at the same time, but he was already sprinting into the field, his own flashlight beam bouncing wildly. "Hey!" he was shouting. "Get out of here!" The thing, whatever it was, didn't move. Those green eyes just watched him come. Mike is fast, and he covered maybe 50 yards in a few seconds, closing the distance. He was still yelling, waving his arms. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. This huge, dark shape was just standing there, perfectly still, letting my brother run right at it. I could make out a massive, bulky silhouette now, towering over the bushes. It was immense, broader than a man, and much, much taller. Mike got to within maybe 30 yards of it. He slowed to a walk, still holding his light on it. He later said he could see thick, dark hair and shoulders that were impossibly wide. And then it was just gone. It didn't run. It didn't duck. 1 second it was there, a solid, physical thing staring him down. And the next second the space where it had been was empty. The green eyes vanished. The silhouette was just not there. It was like it had been erased from reality. Mike stopped dead in his tracks. The field was silent. Then from the deep woods directly behind where the thing had been standing, a sound erupted that I will hear for the rest of my life. It started as a loud, rhythmic knocking. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't wood on wood. It was heavier, denser, like someone was pounding a giant fist against the trunk of a tree. It was fast and it was angry. The knocking stopped abruptly, and then the growl came. It wasn't an animal growl. I've heard bears. I've heard mountain lions. This was different. It was low, so low I felt it in my teeth and in the pit of my stomach more than I heard it. It was a deep, rumbling, guttural vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was intelligent. It was full of hate. It was a sound that had no business coming from a living thing on this earth. That sound broke the spell. "Mike, get back here now!" my dad roared, his voice cracking with a fear I had never heard in him before. Mike didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran back toward us, his face a mask of pure terror. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was just running for his life. We didn't speak. We just moved. We scrambled into our vehicles. My dad yelled, "Follow me! Don't stop for anything!" I jumped into my truck, my hands slipping on the keys as I tried to start it. The engine turned over and I slammed it into drive, my tires spraying gravel as I swung around to follow my dad's SUV. I drove that last 15 minutes home with my knuckles clenched on the wheel, my eyes glued to my dad's taillights, constantly checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see those green eyes gaining on me. I don't think I took a full breath the entire way. We got back to my dad's house, all of us pale and shaking. We didn't even go inside at first. We stood in the well-lit driveway and just looked at each other. Nobody knew what to say. We showed my mom the pictures on our phones, the deep, parallel scratches, the huge non-human footprints stretching down the road. She just stared, her hand over her mouth. We never called the police. What would we say? We saw a Bigfoot. They'd think we were crazy. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think any of us did. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those green eyes in the bushes, and I heard that deep, unnatural growl that seemed to shake the very air. That was 3 years ago. I still have the truck. I never fixed the scratches. I can't bring myself to. Every time I see them, I feel that same cold fear. I never ever drive down Bass Lake Road at night anymore. I'll take the highway, even if it adds an extra half hour to my trip. My brother doesn't talk about it much. When he does, he just says he got close enough to smell it, a smell like wet dog and rotting meat, and that right before it vanished he saw its head turn, and he knew with absolute certainty that it was letting him go, that it could have reached out and taken him if it wanted to. We went back the next day in the bright sunlight. The footprints were gone, washed away by the morning dew or something else. There was nothing in the field. There was no evidence at all. Just my truck door, with 4 long scratches gouged into the metal, and the 3 of us who know what we saw and who know deep down that something is out there in those Michigan woods, something old and powerful and not of our world, and that on that cold October night, it decided to let us know it was there. Story 12. It was just supposed to be a normal Sunday drive, that's all. The kind of thing you do when you're bored and the rain has finally let up after what feels like a solid month of grey. My fiancée was in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, mostly quiet, just enjoying the quiet hum of the truck and the fact that we weren't stuck inside the apartment for once. Our dog, a big goofy golden retriever named Bear, was passed out in the back seat, his head lolling against the window, snoring this little whistling snore he does. Everything was just normal. The kind of normal you don't even think about until it's gone. We were out near Marysville, just cruising. I like driving the back roads, the ones that twist through the woods where the trees are so thick they make a tunnel over the asphalt. Hilltop Road is one of those. It's not a main highway or anything, it's narrow, winding, paved, but with that old patched-up look, and the forest on either side is dense. I mean, you look into it and it's just shadows and green, a wall of ferns and fir trees and salal bushes so thick you can't see 10 feet in. It was one of those late afternoons where the sun was starting to get low, casting long, streaky shadows across the road, but it wasn't dark yet. The air coming in through my window was cool and smelled like wet pine and dirt. We came around this one curve, a pretty sharp right-hander. I was going slow, maybe 25 miles an hour, just taking it easy. And that's when it happened. It came out of the woods on the right side of the road. My brain didn't process it as an animal at first. It was just a massive, sudden movement in my peripheral vision, a blur of color that was wrong. Then it was on the road, right in front of us, and my foot slammed the brake even before I fully understood what I was seeing. It was huge. I can't stress that enough. It was just huge. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe 8.5. Its shoulders were so broad, I remember thinking they looked like a football player's pads, but these weren't pads. They were part of it. I'd say its shoulders were 3 feet across, easy. It was covered in hair, but not like a bear's. This was different. The color was this weird mix, like a light brown or a tan, but darker in places, like it was sun-bleached on top and darker underneath. It wasn't shaggy, but it was thick, like a horse's winter coat. It didn't run, it loped. It crossed the road from our right to our left in 2, maybe 3 of these powerful ground-eating strides. The movement is burned into my head. Its arms swung with this immense, purposeful power, and its thighs were like tree trunks. I saw the muscles bunch and flex under that hair with each step. It was so fast, impossibly fast. It didn't even look at us. Its head was forward, focused on the other side of the road, like we were just an inconvenience, a piece of scenery it had to move past, and then it was gone. It reached the left-hand shoulder and just descended. The slope there is steep, really steep, covered in a tangle of blackberry bushes, young alder trees and ferns. It should have been impossible to move through that quickly. A human would have had to climb down, or slide, or get torn to shreds by the thorns. This thing just went down into it. It didn't break its stride. It plunged into that green wall and vanished. The whole thing, from the moment I first saw it to the moment it disappeared, took maybe 3 seconds. 4, tops. The truck had stalled out. I'd hit the brakes so hard the engine just died. For a second there was just silence, except for the ticking of the cooling engine. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping that felt like it was going to break bones. I could feel the blood draining from my face, a cold wash that left my skin tingling. My fiancée made this sound, a tiny choked gasp. What was that? Her voice was a thin, high whisper. I couldn't answer. I just stared at the spot where it had gone into the trees. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel a tremor starting in my legs, a fine, uncontrollable shaking. Then the sound started. From the woods on the left, where it had disappeared, there was this tremendous crashing. It wasn't the sound of a deer. A deer is light, quick, a series of snaps and rustles. This was a brutal, smashing sound. It was the sound of something big and heavy and strong, just plowing through the undergrowth, not going around anything, just going through it. I heard branches snapping, not little twigs, but thick woody cracks. I heard the thrashing of ferns and bushes being shoved aside. I don't know what came over me. Adrenaline, I guess. Shock. Some stupid primal part of my brain that needed to confirm what I'd just seen. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. The truck started with a roar that seemed obscenely loud in the quiet. "What are you doing?" my fiancée asked, her voice tight with panic. "I have to see," I heard myself say. It didn't even sound like me. I pulled the truck over to the left shoulder as far as I could without going into the ditch and threw it in park. I undid my seatbelt. My movements felt jerky, robotic. "Don't you get out, don't you dare," she pleaded, grabbing my arm. I looked at her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in her before. It was that look that made it all real. I pulled my arm away gently. "I'll just be a second. I have to look." I opened the door, and the sound of the crashing got louder. It was already moving away, downhill, but it was still so loud. It sounded like a bulldozer was carving a path through the forest. The air outside was cold, and it smelled different now. Over the scent of pine and wet earth, there was this other smell. It's hard to describe. Musky, heavy, like wet dog, but stronger, more pungent, mixed with something else, something wild and rank, like old manure and decaying leaves. It made the back of my throat feel thick. I took a few steps toward the edge of the road, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. I peered down the slope. The ferns and bushes were all torn up. A path had been smashed through the vegetation. It wasn't a trail. It was a wreckage. A young alder tree, maybe 3 inches thick, was snapped in half, the white splintered wood stark against the green. Blackberry vines were shredded, leaves and crushed berries scattered everywhere. The ground was scuffed and torn, and the path led straight down, disappearing into the deeper shadows of the woods. The crashing sound was fading now, getting farther and farther away, but I could still hear it, this relentless, destructive movement through the trees. Then it just stopped. Not faded out, but stopped, like a switch had been flipped. One moment there was this incredible, terrifying noise, and the next, there was nothing. Just the normal, quiet sounds of the forest, a bird chirping somewhere, the whisper of the wind in the high branches. The silence was worse, so much worse. I stood there for maybe a full minute, just staring into the trees, trying to see something, anything, but there was nothing, just the torn-up path and the shadows. My heart was still hammering. I could feel the cold sweat soaking through my t-shirt under my jacket. That's when I heard it from the truck. A low, terrified whimper. I turned around. Bear was awake. He was standing up in the back seat, his front paws on the center console, his whole body rigid. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring, fixedly, at the exact spot on the tree line where the thing had vanished. His ears were pinned back, his lips were pulled away from his teeth in a silent snarl, and his whole body was trembling. That low, scared whine was coming from deep in his chest, a sound I'd only ever heard once before when he was a puppy and got scared by fireworks. He's a happy dog, a brave dog. He chases squirrels and barks at the mailman. He's never ever acted like this. He was terrified, not curious, not alert, absolutely piss himself terrified. I stumbled back to the truck, my legs feeling like jelly. I yanked the door open and fell into the driver's seat, pulling the door shut with a slam that made both my fiancée and me jump. I hit the lock button, a stupid, pointless gesture, but I did it anyway. "Start the truck," she whispered, her eyes still glued to the trees. "Please, just start the truck." I did. I put it in drive and pulled back onto the road, my movements slow and careful. I didn't speed up. I drove maybe 10 miles an hour, both of us just staring out the windows, scanning the woods. Bear didn't move. He stayed there, frozen, staring out the back window now, that low whine still coming from him. He was still staring as we drove away, as if he could still see it. We didn't talk for a long time. The only sounds were the rumble of the engine and Bear's scared whimpers. I could feel the adrenaline crash starting, leaving me drained and hollow. My hands were still shaking on the wheel. After a few miles, my fiancée finally spoke, her voice quiet and thin. "What was that?" I just shook my head. I had no words. I still don't. I've lived in Washington my whole life. I've seen bears. I've seen elk. I know what they look like, how they move, how big they are. This wasn't a bear. A bear moves on all fours. It's built differently. Its proportions are all wrong compared to what I saw. This thing was built like a man, but a giant, powerful, impossibly broad man covered in hair. The way it moved, that powerful, swinging gait. It was purposeful. It was intelligent. It knew exactly where it was going. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. Bear eventually settled down, lying on the back seat, but he wasn't sleeping. He was just lying there, tense, his head on his paws, his eyes wide open. Every so often he'd lift his head and look out the window into the passing trees and let out a soft, uneasy sigh. When we got home, he wouldn't get out of the truck. I had to coax him, and when he finally jumped down, he immediately pressed himself against my legs, his tail tucked, scanning the yard like he was expecting an ambush. He's been clingy ever since. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been back to Hilltop Road. I don't think I ever will. My fiancée doesn't like to talk about it. If I bring it up, she just gets quiet and changes the subject. It's like we have this unspoken agreement to pretend it didn't happen. But it did happen. I saw it. I heard it smash through the woods. I smelled that wild, musky stink. I saw the terror in my dog's eyes. I lie awake at night sometimes, and I see it. I see that light brown, powerful form loping across the road, its massive shoulders rolling, its tree trunk legs moving with a speed that makes no sense. I hear the absolute silence that followed the crashing, and I feel that same cold fear sitting in the pit of my stomach, reminding me that the woods out here are deep and old, and we don't know half of what's in them. I saw something on Hilltop Road. I don't know what it was. I just know that it was real. It was huge, and it moved in a way that nothing should be able to move. And the way my dog looked at the trees afterward, the way he whined, he saw it too, and he knew. He knew it wasn't just some animal, it was something else, and it's still out there. Story 13. The day had been hot and sticky, the kind where the air feels heavy and you're sweating even if you're just sitting still. By the time evening rolled around, the sun was starting to dip and the heat hadn't let up much. We met up at my place around 8 o'clock, me and 4 other guys. I won't use their names because, well, it feels wrong to drag them into this. And honestly, I don't think they'd want me to. We were all around the same age, 15 or so, and we'd been friends since we were little. 2 of them were the tough types, you know, the kind who never showed fear, always acting like they were invincible. The other 2 were more like me, just along for the ride, maybe a bit nervous but trying to play it cool. We packed some flashlights, a couple of bottles of water, and headed out. The woods weren't far from my house, just a short walk to the edge of town, and then you're into this thick forest that stretches for miles. The path we took was one we'd used before during the day, but at night it felt completely different. The trees closed in around us, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, but only in narrow beams, leaving most of the world pitch black. Every little sound made us jump. The crunch of leaves under our feet, the rustle of something in the bushes, the distant hoot of an owl. It was that kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat, and it gets louder the more you listen. The hike took about an hour, and the whole time we were joking around, trying to scare each other with stories about ghosts or animals. But underneath it all, I could feel this low-level tension building. The air was cool now, with a damp chill that seeped through my clothes, and the smell of pine and damp earth was strong. I remember my hands feeling cold, even though I was sweating a little from the walk. We were all wearing jeans and hoodies, but the cold seemed to get right through them. When we finally reached the cabin, it was exactly how we'd heard. Old, falling apart, with a sagging roof and windows boarded up. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the moonlight. The porch was rickety, with steps that creaked when we stepped on them. We stood there for a minute, just taking it in, our flashlights sweeping over the peeling paint and broken shutters. One of the tough guys laughed and said something like, "This place is a dump," but his voice was a little too loud, like he was trying to convince himself. We decided to hang out on the porch for a bit before heading back. It was around 9:30 or so, and the night was dead quiet except for the occasional rustle in the woods. We were sitting on the porch steps or leaning against the railing, talking in low voices. I was inside the cabin for a minute, shining my flashlight around the main room. It was empty, except for some broken furniture and a thick layer of dust. The air in there was stale and cold, and I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. I remember thinking how isolated it felt, like we were the only people for miles. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it, a sharp, panicked scream from the porch. It wasn't the kind of sound you hear in movies. It was raw and real, like someone had been punched in the gut. I rushed back to the door and saw my 3 friends who'd been outside scrambling inside, their faces white as sheets. One of them was trembling so hard he could barely stand, and another had tears in his eyes. They were all talking at once, their words jumbled and frantic. "Something's out there," one of them gasped, his voice cracking. It was huge, man, like 7 feet tall, all covered in hair, and it was hunched over. Another one chimed in, his hands shaking as he pointed toward the woods. We heard movement, like something big crashing through the bushes, and then it ran across the path. So fast, I barely saw it, but it was there. I didn't believe them at first. I thought they were messing with me, trying to pull a prank. But then I looked at their faces, and that's when it hit me. These were the tough guys, the ones who never backed down from anything. One of them, who'd always been the bravest in our group, was nearly in tears, his eyes wide with pure terror. He was gripping the doorframe like he was afraid he'd fall over, and his breath was coming in short, ragged bursts. That's what convinced me. Seeing him like that, it wasn't an act, it was real fear, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes you feel cold all over. I stepped closer to the door and peered out into the darkness. The woods were silent now, but the air felt charged, like right before a storm. My heart was pounding in my chest, so loud I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up, and a chill ran down my spine. One of my friends whispered, "We need to go now," and his voice was so quiet it was almost a whimper. We didn't waste any time. We grabbed our stuff and bolted out of the cabin, not even bothering to close the door behind us. The path back seemed twice as long as before, and every shadow felt like it was moving. We ran, our flashlights bouncing wildly, illuminating patches of ground and then leaving them in darkness. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something following us, but there was nothing there, just the endless black of the woods. The sounds of our footsteps and heavy breathing were the only things breaking the silence, but every now and then I'd hear a twig snap or a rustle off to the side, and my stomach would clench. The whole way back, no one spoke. We were too scared to say anything, too focused on getting out of there. I could feel the fear like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My legs were aching from running, and my hands were slick with sweat. making it hard to hold the flashlight. At one point, one of the guys stumbled and almost fell, and we all froze for a second, listening. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound from deep in the trees, not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was short, more like a grunt, but it sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We started running again, faster this time, not looking back. When we finally broke out of the woods and saw the lights of town, it was like coming up for air after being underwater. We didn't stop until we were back on my street, and even then, we stood there for a minute panting and shaking. No one wanted to talk about what happened. We just split up and went home, each of us dealing with it in our own way. I remember lying in bed that night, unable to sleep, replaying everything in my head. The image of my friends' terrified faces, the way they described that thing. Tall, hairy, hunched over, moving so fast it was just a blur. It didn't make sense. Was it a bear? But bears don't run like that, and they're not that tall. A person? No, it was too big, too animal-like. We never went back to that cabin at night, not even in a group. Sometimes we'd talk about it during the day, but it was always in hushed tones, like we were afraid saying it out loud would bring it back. The terror wasn't just about what we saw or what they saw, since I didn't see it myself, but about how it made us feel. It was the frantic state of my friends, the way they were so sure of what they'd witnessed, and the creature's swift, unnatural movement. It convinced us that we'd encountered something out of the ordinary, something that didn't belong in those wooded hills. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about it. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a large animal, or a trick of the light, or just our imaginations running wild. But deep down, I know it was real. The fear was too intense, too raw, to be made up. And that's the thing that haunts me the most. Not knowing what it was, and never being able to explain it. We just left it behind in those woods, and I guess it's still out there, waiting. Story 14. I still remember that day like it was yesterday, even though it was over 170 years ago. I know how that sounds. Most people would call me crazy or say I'm making it up. But I swear on everything I hold dear that what happened to me on March 26, 1847, near Mount St. Helens, is the God's honest truth. I was Paul Kane, an explorer and artist, drawn to that part of the world because I'd heard rumors about places no white man had ever set foot. I'd spent weeks sketching the landscapes and talking to the native tribes, trying to understand why they avoided the mountain like it was cursed. That morning, I woke up in my camp not far from a small village, the air crisp and cold, with a mist hanging low in the trees. I could smell pine and damp earth, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all seemed, but deep down, I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I'd been in the area for about a week, and every time I brought up the mountain, the natives would clam up or change the subject. Their fear was palpable. It was in their eyes, the way they'd glance toward the peak and then look away quickly, like they were afraid it was watching us. That day, I decided I had to get answers. I packed my sketchbook and some supplies, thinking I might try to get closer on my own if no one would guide me. First, I headed to the village to see if I could find someone to talk to. The sun was just starting to break through the clouds, casting long shadows, and the ground was still muddy from recent rains. My boots squelched in the mud, and I could feel the chill seeping through my coat. When I reached the village, I found an older man I'd spoken to before. He didn't have a name I knew, just a weathered face and eyes that held a lot of sadness. I offered him tobacco and a few trinkets I'd brought, hoping he'd open up. At first, he just shook his head, muttering in his language, but when I pressed him, he finally told me why no one would go near the mountain. He said it was inhabited by skookums, beings that were like men but bigger, covered in hair, and that they were cannibals. His hands trembled as he spoke, and he kept looking over his shoulder like something might be creeping up on us. Then he shared a story that made my blood run cold. He told me about a man from his tribe who, years ago, went to the mountain with a companion. They were hunting or something, I don't remember the exact reason, but only one came back. The survivor said his friend was taken by a skookum, dragged into the trees, and later they found bits of him, chewed up and left behind. The way he described it, with such raw terror in his voice, I felt a shiver down my spine. He said the skookums watch from the shadows, and if you get too close, they'll make you disappear forever. Hearing that, I got this stubborn urge to see for myself. I've always been curious, maybe too curious for my own good, and I thought, how bad could it be? So I offered a bribe, more tobacco, some coins, even promised to share any art I made. But no one would take it, not a single person. They all refused, some outright laughing at me like I was a fool, others just walking away without a word. One younger man looked me in the eye and said, "You go there, you die." His tone was so final, so sure that it stuck with me. I remember standing there, feeling the weight of their fear, and I decided I had to go alone. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was that artist's drive to capture something no one else had, but I packed my bag and started toward the mountain around midday. The hike started off normal enough. The forest was thick with tall evergreens, their branches blocking out a lot of the sun, so it felt like twilight, even though it was only afternoon. I had my rifle slung over my shoulder, but I didn't really expect to use it. I thought I was just being cautious. The ground was uneven, covered in fallen leaves and pine needles, and every now and then I'd hear animals rustling in the bushes, squirrels, birds, that kind of thing. But as I got closer to the base of the mountain, the sounds changed. The birdsong died down and it got quieter, too quiet. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I remember my heart starting to beat faster, and I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but the silence felt heavy, oppressive. I pushed on, following a faint game trail I'd spotted on my maps. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in little puffs. My fingers were numb from the chill, and I had to keep blowing on them to warm up. After a couple of hours, I stopped to take a break near a stream. The water was icy cold, and I knelt down to drink, cupping my hands. That's when I first noticed the smell, a musky, rotten odor like something had died nearby. I figured it was just a dead animal, maybe a deer, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then I saw footprints in the mud by the water's edge. They were huge, bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen, with 5 toes and a shape that looked almost human. My stomach tightened, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I quickly stood up, scanning the trees around me. Nothing moved, but I had this eerie feeling that I was being watched. I decided to sketch the footprints, thinking it might be evidence of something, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my pencil. I managed to get a rough drawing, then packed up and kept going, telling myself I was just spooked. The trail led uphill and the trees thinned out a bit, giving me a view of the mountain's slope. It was rugged, with rocky outcrops and dense patches of brush. I remember the sky was starting to cloud over, casting everything in a grey, gloomy light. I kept hearing twigs snap behind me, but whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. Once, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark shape darting between trees. But when I looked directly, it was gone. My mind raced back to the story the native man told me about the skookum dragging his friend away, and I felt a lump in my throat. I almost turned back right then, but something pushed me forward. As I climbed higher, the smell got stronger, that same musky stench, and now it was mixed with something else, like wet fur and decay. I started noticing broken branches on some of the smaller trees, snapped off about 7 or 8 feet up, like something big had forced its way through. Then I found a pile of rocks stacked in a way that didn't look natural, almost like a crude cairn. My skin crawled, and I could feel the hair on my arm standing up. I pulled my rifle off my shoulder, holding it tight, my knuckles white. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and it sounded like whispers, like someone was talking just out of earshot. I kept telling myself it was the wind, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I decided to find a spot to rest and get my bearings. I found a small clearing surrounded by thick firs, and I sat down on a fallen log, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl from somewhere close by. It wasn't like any animal I knew. It was deeper, more resonant, and it seemed to vibrate through the ground. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. The growl came again, followed by a series of knocks on wood, like someone was hitting a tree with a heavy stick. Knock, knock, knock. It echoed through the forest, and I felt a primal fear take over. I stood up slowly, rifle aimed into the trees, but I couldn't see anything. Then, from behind a thicket, I saw a shadow move. It was tall, way taller than a man, and covered in dark hair. It stepped out into the open for just a second, and I got a glimpse of massive shoulders and long arms that hung almost to its knees. Its face was shadowed, but I could see eyes that glinted in the dim light, and they were fixed on me. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about direction, just wanting to get away. Branches scratched at my face and arms, and I could feel blood trickling down my cheek. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps pounding the ground, gaining on me fast. The thing was chasing me, and it was loud, grunting and snapping trees like they were twigs. I stumbled over a root and fell hard, my rifle flying out of my hands. I scrambled to my feet, but I knew I couldn't outrun it. I ducked behind a large rock, pressing myself against it, trying to make myself small. My whole body was trembling, and I could taste bile in my mouth. The footsteps stopped nearby, and I heard sniffing, like it was trying to scent me out. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find me. For what felt like an eternity, I stayed there, listening. The sniffing moved away, and I heard the knocks again, farther off this time. I waited until I couldn't hear anything but the wind. Then I slowly peeked out. The clearing was empty, but the smell was still strong. I found my rifle a few feet away, covered in mud, and I grabbed it, not even bothering to check if it was loaded. I started back the way I came, moving as fast as I could without making noise. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle made me jump. I didn't stop until I reached the stream, where I'd seen the footprints earlier. By then, the sun was setting, and the forest was getting dark. I knew I had to get back to camp before nightfall, or I might not make it at all. The hike back was a blur of fear and exhaustion. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing following me. When I finally stumbled into my camp, it was fully dark, and I collapsed by my fire, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made me sit bolt upright, my heart racing. The next morning, I packed up and left the area for good. I never went back to Mount St. Helens, and I never told anyone what happened until now. Over the years, I've heard stories about Sasquatch and Bigfoot, and I can't help but think they're connected to what I saw. The mountain erupted in 1980, changing everything, but from what I've read, people still report strange things there, the Skookum's legacy of fear enduring. To this day, I don't know what that was, but I know it was real, and I'll never forget the terror of that single day. Batuti Story 15. It was the summer of 2019, and I'd driven out to the White Mountains in Arizona for a short break. Just a few days to myself, to get away from the noise and the constant hum of the city. I'd been looking forward to this for months. Fly fishing was my thing, my quiet obsession, and the area around Holly Lake was supposed to be a hidden gem. I'd read about it online, seen a few grainy photos from other anglers, and decided it was worth the long drive. That morning I woke up in my cheap motel room before the sun had even thought about rising. My truck was packed the night before, rod, waders, vest, a small cooler with some water and snacks. The air was cool, that dry Arizona chill that seeps into your bones, and I remember shivering a little as I pulled on my jeans and a thick flannel. I didn't bother with coffee. I just wanted to get out there, to be by the water as the world woke up. I drove with the windows down, the dark pine forest sliding by on either side of the road. The headlights cut a weak path through the pre-dawn gloom. It was dead quiet, no other cars, just me and the crunch of my tires on the gravel turnoffs. I found a spot to park near what I think was Trout Creek. The maps were a bit vague, but the stream looked right. I pulled off onto a wide patch of dirt, killed the engine, and just sat for a minute. The silence was immense. It wasn't just quiet. It was a presence, a heavy blanket over everything. I could hear my own breathing. I got my gear out of the truck bed, the metal latch of the tailgate sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. I remember thinking I should be quieter, like I was intruding on something. I shrugged into my vest, slung my rod case over my shoulder, and started walking. The path was narrow, beaten down by animals more than people, I figured. It followed the stream, which was just a soft gurgle to my left. The water was dark, reflecting the deep blue of the early morning sky. I could make out the shapes of stones on the bottom here and there. I walked for maybe 10-15 minutes until I found a spot that felt right. A wider, shallower stretch, where the water fanned out over a gravel bed. The trees pulled back a little here, giving me some room to cast. I could see the first hints of pink and orange starting to bleed into the sky above the treetops. It was beautiful, peaceful in a way that's hard to describe if you've never been completely alone in a place like that. I remember feeling a deep, solid calm settle over me. This was exactly what I needed. I took my time setting up, unzipping the rod case, the soft shh of the fabric, piecing the rod together, the ferrules clicking snugly, threading the line through the guides, my fingers fumbling a little in the cold. I tied on a fly, a little grey thing meant to look like a mayfly, I think, and waded into the stream. The water was ice cold, instantly numbing my feet through the waders. It felt good, clean. I started casting. That's the best part. The rhythm of it. The line unfurling in the air, the fly landing on the water with barely a ripple. I was in my own world, focused on the drift of the fly, the subtle tug I was hoping for. The sun was just starting to crest the trees, throwing long, sharp shadows across the water. The forest was waking up. I heard a few birds starting to chirp, the scolding chatter of a squirrel somewhere off in the pines. Normal sounds, the sounds you expect. I'd been at it for maybe 20 minutes. I was facing downstream, concentrating on a spot where the current swirled behind a large, moss-covered rock. I false-cast a couple of times, letting more line out, and then sent the fly sailing toward the eddy. It was a perfect cast. It landed soft as a feather. I let it drift, and that's when it happened. The sound came from behind me, from the deep woods on the other side of the stream. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. A few hundred yards, I'd guess. It started low, a deep, guttural rumble that I felt in my chest, more than heard with my ears. It was like the lowest note from a giant cello, a vibration that shook the air. Then it climbed. It didn't just get louder, the pitch rose higher and higher into this piercing, wavering shriek that was just wrong. It was a howl, but it wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a wolf. I've heard those. This was different. It had a thickness to it, a raw power that made the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand straight up. It sounded like a declaration, like something was announcing itself to the whole damn forest. And it went on and on. It must have lasted for 10-15 seconds, which doesn't sound like much until you're standing frozen in ice-cold water listening to it. It felt like an hour. The sound filled everything. It swallowed the birdsong. It swallowed the gurgle of the stream. It swallowed me. Then it stopped, not faded, just cut off. The silence that rushed back in was even heavier than before. It was a deafening, pressing silence. I didn't move. I'm not even sure I was breathing. My rod was still held out in front of me, the line slack in the water. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack one. I could feel the pulse in my throat. in my temples. My mouth had gone completely dry. My first thought was, bear, but I've heard bears. They roar, they grunt. This wasn't that. This was a vocalization, something with a structure to it. My next thought, the one that sent a fresh, cold spike of fear straight into my gut, was the one I didn't want to have, the one you read about on weird forums late at night. I stood there, rooted to the spot, waiting for it to happen again. Every muscle in my body was tensed, coiled tight. I scanned the tree line across the stream. The shadows between the pines were deep and black. I couldn't see anything moving. Nothing at all. It was just a wall of green and brown and shadow, but I felt watched. I know that sounds crazy, but I did. It was a crawling sensation on my skin, like 1,000 invisible insects, the feeling that something was in there, standing perfectly still, and it knew exactly where I was. I don't know how long I stood like that. A minute? 5? Time had gotten weird. My mind was racing, trying to categorize the sound to fit it into a box labeled known animal. It wouldn't fit. The sheer volume of it was staggering. To make a sound that loud, that deep, that resonant, it had to be big, really big. Slowly, carefully, I lowered my rod. The fly was probably snagged on a rock by now, but I didn't care. I took a step backward, my wader boots scraping loudly on a river stone. I winced at the noise. I was trying to be silent, but my body wasn't cooperating. My legs felt weak, shaky, like they were made of rubber. I kept my eyes glued to the opposite tree line. I started wading backward toward the bank I'd come from. The water felt 10 times colder now. Every little sound was magnified. The swish of my waders through the water, the crunch of gravel under my feet as I reached the bank. I was expecting another howl, or worse, the sound of something big moving through the brush, coming closer. I climbed out of the water and stood on the damp earth, dripping. I was breathing in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to drop my rod and sprint back to the truck. But I was afraid that if I ran, if I made a sudden panicked movement, it would trigger a chase. That's what it felt like, a standoff. I was in its space, and it had let me know, so I didn't run. I forced myself to turn around slowly, my back to the stream and the thing in the woods, and I started walking. The path that had felt so peaceful before now felt like a tunnel, with danger lurking on all sides. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me flinch and look over my shoulder. I was hyper-aware of everything. The way the morning light dappled through the canopy, the smell of damp earth and pine, the chill of the air on my sweaty skin. It was all incredibly vivid, painted in the sharp colors of pure fear. I made it back to the truck without looking back again. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get the key into the door lock. I threw my rod into the passenger seat, not even bothering to break it down. I climbed in, slammed the door, and hit the locks. The solid thunk was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I sat there for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I watched the tree line, expecting to see something, anything, emerge. Nothing did. The forest was just a forest again, quiet, serene. But I knew it wasn't. I knew what was in there. I started the engine and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop until I was back on the main highway with other cars around me. I fished for 2 more hours that morning. After the initial panic subsided, after I'd sat in the truck for a while and my heart rate had slowed to something close to normal, a strange kind of resolve settled over me. I don't know why I did it. Stubbornness, maybe. Or maybe I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't scared off. So I went to a different spot, a more open area downstream, and I fished. I didn't catch anything. I barely even tried. I was just going through the motions, my ears straining for any sound that was out of place. The whole time, the memory of that howl was echoing in my head. I couldn't shake it, and that's when the real thinking started. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was joined by this profound sense of, I don't know, insignificance. That thing, whatever it wasn't interested in me. It hadn't charged me. It hadn't stalked me. It had just made a sound, a powerful, terrifying sound to mark its territory. To say, I am here. I was just a temporary visitor, a blip on its radar. The terror wasn't about being attacked. It was about the sheer, overwhelming realization that I was in the presence of something unknown, something powerful and old, and completely outside of my understanding. It was the feeling of the map having a giant blank spot with "Here be monsters" written on it, and I had just stumbled into it. I've never told anyone this. Not my friends, not my family. Who would believe me? They'd say it was a bear, a weird elk. My imagination. I know what I heard. I can still hear it sometimes, when it's very quiet. That low rumble building into a shriek that doesn't belong in this world. It's been years now, and I still can't explain it. I still get chills. I never went back to that part of the stream. Some things you just leave alone. Story 16. My name is Shannon Morgan, and I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me and my partner a few years back in the Kennett area of Alaska. We were on a hiking trip, just the two of us, and it was supposed to be this peaceful getaway into the wilderness. But what happened that day stuck with me, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or monsters or anything like that. I'm pretty grounded, you know. But this was different. It felt real in a way that's hard to explain, and I need to get it off my chest. We'd been planning this trip for months. My partner and I both loved the outdoors, and Alaska had always been on our list. We packed light, just the essentials: tent, sleeping bags, a small stove, and enough food for a couple of days. The plan was to hike into this remote spot, set up camp, and spend a few days exploring. But things didn't go as smooth as we hoped. Our flight got delayed, and then we had car trouble on the way to the trailhead. By the time we finally started hiking, it was already late afternoon. The sun was dipping low, and we knew we were cutting it close with daylight. The Kennett area is wild, dense forests, rolling hills, and this eerie quiet that settles in once you're deep enough. It's beautiful, but it can feel isolating real fast. We were following a narrow trail that wound through tall spruce and hemlock trees, the air crisp and cool with that distinct Alaskan chill. I remember the smell of damp earth and pine needles, and the way our boots crunched on the ground. We were both tired from the travel, but excited to be out there. My partner was ahead of me, humming some tune, and I was just taking it all in, trying to shake off the stress from the delays. As we hiked, the light started fading faster than we expected. Alaska in the summer can have long days, but once the sun goes down, it gets dark quick in the woods. We decided to find a spot to camp before it was pitch black. After another 20 minutes or so, we came across a small clearing off the trail. It wasn't ideal, kind of uneven and surrounded by thick trees, but it was the best we could do. We dropped our packs, and I felt that relief mixed with exhaustion. My partner started unpacking the tent while I gathered some dry branches for a fire. The air was getting colder, and I could see my breath forming little clouds in the dim light. Setting up camp took longer than usual because we were both kind of sluggish. The tent went up, and we got a small fire going. It wasn't much, just enough to cook on and keep us warm. We hung our food supplies in a tree away from camp, like you're supposed to in bear country. Even though we hadn't seen any signs of bears, you don't take chances out there. We cooked a simple meal, some dehydrated pasta and hot chocolate, and sat by the fire eating in silence. The flames crackled and the shadows danced around us, making the trees look like they were moving. I remember feeling a bit on edge, but I brushed it off as just being tired and in a new place. After we ate, I needed a moment to myself. I'm a smoker, I know, bad habit, and I stepped away from the camp to have a cigarette. I walked over to the edge of the clearing, near where the trail started, and leaned against a tree. It was darker there, with only a faint glow from the fire behind me. I lit up and took a deep drag, letting the nicotine calm my nerves. The night was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just this heavy silence that made my skin prickle. I've been in the woods plenty of times, but this felt different, like something was off. I was standing there looking down the trail when I saw something move in the distance. At first I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me. The light was dim and shadows were everywhere. But then I saw it again, a shape coming toward me. It looked like a man on a bicycle. I know how crazy that sounds, but that's what it seemed like. My heart did this little jump because, hey, maybe it was another hiker or someone from a nearby camp. But as I stared, I realized it wasn't moving. It was just there, standing still. I squinted, trying to make it out better. The figure was about 50 yards away, silhouetted against the darker background of the trees. It was tall and dark, and from that angle, with its legs wide apart, it really did look like it was gripping handlebars. But the more I focused, the more wrong it felt. The torso was bulky, way too broad for a person, and the arms, they were shaped weird, like they were too long or bent in a way that wasn't right. I felt a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't a man on a bicycle, this was something else. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel my pulse quicken. I took a step back, still holding my cigarette, and my hands started to shake. I called out to my partner, my voice coming out all shaky and low. "Hey, come here for a sec," I said, trying to sound calm, but failing miserably. I didn't take my eyes off the figure. It was just standing there, motionless, and I had this overwhelming sense that it was watching me. The air felt colder, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My partner must have heard the tension in my voice because they came over quickly. "What's up?" they asked, standing beside me. I pointed down the trail, my finger trembling. "Look at that," I whispered. But when I turned back to where the figure was, it was gone. Just like that. Vanished. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Where did it go?" I said, my voice rising. My partner squinted into the darkness. "I don't see anything," they said, sounding confused, but I knew what I saw. I described it to them. The man on a bicycle illusion, the bulky torso, the odd-shaped arms. As I was talking, my eyes scanned the trees where the figure had been, and then I saw it again, or rather, I saw movement. It shifted, not like a person walking, but something else entirely. It moved swift and silent, gliding into the trees in 2 long steps. I mean, 2 steps, and it was gone from view. There was no sound, no crunching leaves, no snapping twigs, nothing, just this eerie, fluid motion that made my blood run cold. I grabbed my partner's arm, my fingers digging in. "Did you see that?" I gasped. They shook their head, but I could tell they were spooked now too. "What was it?" they asked, their voice tight. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whatever it wasn't human. The way it moved, it was too fast, too quiet. And the size of it, up close, even from a distance, I could tell it was massive. Taller than a person, with those wide-set legs and that bulky upper body. I felt this primal fear wash over me, like I was prey being watched by a predator. We stood there for what felt like forever, staring into the darkness. The forest had gone completely silent, like even the insects had stopped chirping. I could feel every hair on my body standing up. My partner suggested we go back to the fire, and we did, walking quickly, our footsteps loud in the quiet. Once we were by the fire, we both sat down, and I could see the fear in their eyes. "What do you think it was?" they asked again. I just shook my head. I didn't want to say it, but the word Bigfoot popped into my mind. I'd heard stories, but I always dismissed them as nonsense. Now, I wasn't so sure. We decided to stay put for the night because it was too dark to pack up and leave. But we didn't sleep much. Every little sound had us jumping. The crackle of the fire, the wind rustling the trees. I kept my flashlight handy, shining it into the woods every now and then, but I never saw anything. My mind kept replaying that moment. The figure standing there, then moving so fast and silently. The more I thought about it, the more terrified I became. It wasn't just the sight of it, it was the feeling it gave me, like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. The next morning, as soon as the sun was up, we searched the area. The ground was firm and dry, covered in a layer of pine needles and dead leaves. We looked for tracks, for any sign of what I'd seen, but there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It was like it had never been there. My partner tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just a bear or a trick of the light, but I knew better. Bears don't stand upright like that, and they don't move without making a sound. This was something else entirely. We packed up our camp quickly and hiked out, not talking much. The whole way back, I felt watched, like eyes were on me from the trees. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure again, but I never did. When we got to the car, I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We drove away, and I remember looking back at the forest, feeling this deep unease settle in my bones. That was years ago, and I still think about it often. I've never gone back to that area, and I don't think I ever will. Whatever I saw that day, it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I know. It was tall, dark, and moved in a way that defied explanation. The silence it left behind was almost worse than the sight of it. I've told this story to a few people, and most don't believe me, but I know what I saw, and sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I can still feel that cold fear, like it's right there with me, just out of sight. Story 17. It was one of those perfect Arizona evenings that almost makes you forget how brutal the desert can be. The kind where the heat of the day just melts away, leaving behind air that's cool and clean in your lungs. My buddy and I were about 7 miles north of Sawmill, deep in the heart of the res, set up near a little waterhole we'd scouted a few weeks back. Archery elk season. We were feeling good, man, hopeful. We'd spent the afternoon hauling in this portable blind, one of those pop-up mesh tents, and got it situated in a thicket of juniper and scrub oak with a clean line of sight to the water. The whole setup felt right. We were tucked in by, 4:30 in the afternoon? Something like that. The sun was still well up, but the light was getting that long golden quality that makes everything look softer. We'd been quiet for hours, just sitting, watching. The only things that came by were a few head of scrawny cattle, their bells clanking softly, and later a single coyote that trotted down, took a quick drink, and vanished back into the brush like a ghost. That's normal. That's what you expect. You get into a rhythm out there. The sounds of the woods become a kind of background music. Crickets starting up, the occasional rustle of a lizard in the dry leaves, the wind, always the wind, whispering through the pines up on the ridges. It's peaceful. You let your mind wander. You think about work, about life back in town, about nothing at all. You just are. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature dropped with it. That desert cold hits you fast. 1 minute you're comfortable, the next you're digging for your jacket. The sky went from orange to deep purple, and then the stars started popping out, one by one. It was getting dark for real. We had a little battery-powered lantern inside the blind with us, casting this weak, yellowish glow that just made the shadows outside seem even blacker. We'd been whispering back and forth for a little while, deciding whether to call it. The elk weren't moving. Sometimes they come to water later, after full dark, but with archery you need to be able to see. It was getting to that point where it was more about sitting in the cold for no reason than it was about hunting. I remember looking at my watch. It was 8:25. I said, "Screw it, man. Let's pack it in. Get some real food." He agreed. We started the quiet, methodical process of breaking down our spot, collapsing the blind, stuffing it into its bag, winding up the cords for our bows. It's not loud, but there are sounds. The zipper on the bag, the crunch of our boots on the gravelly soil, the soft clatter of gear being stowed in our packs. We were just about done. I had my pack on one shoulder, my bow in my other hand. My friend was kneeling down, cinching the last strap on his own pack. That's when we heard it. It came from the northwest, maybe 200 yards out, back in the thicker timber. A scream. But it wasn't a scream like a person, and it sure as hell wasn't a bull elk. I've heard bulls bugle. This was different. It was high-pitched, piercing, but it had a raw, guttural power behind it that felt like it vibrated in my teeth. It wasn't a long sound. It was a short, sharp blast that cut through the quiet evening and then stopped, just like that. We both froze. I mean, completely froze. I was bent over, and I just stopped moving. My friend was still on one knee. We looked at each other, our eyes wide in the dim leftover light. I could see the white of his eyes clear as day. I remember my first thought was, what the hell was that? It was so alien, so out of place, that my brain couldn't immediately file it away. It wasn't a coyote, wasn't a mountain lion. I've heard them both. This was something else. We stayed like that, frozen, for maybe 5 seconds, just listening. The woods had gone dead quiet. The crickets that had been chirping their heads off a moment before had just shut off, like someone flipped a switch. The cattle that had been milling around further down the waterhole suddenly got restless. I could hear them moving, their bells jangling with a nervous, quick rhythm, and then the sound of them moving away, crashing through the brush, not caring how much noise they made. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, thick silence. It felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. It was an active silence, a listening silence. Something out there had told every other living thing to shut up, and they had all obeyed. Then it came again. This one was closer, a lot closer, 150 yards, maybe less. And it was louder, much louder. It wasn't just a scream this time. It was a roar, a high-pitched, shrieking roar that had so much force behind it, I could feel it in my chest. It wasn't just sound. It was a physical pressure in the air. It didn't trail off. It was cut short, aggressive, like a challenge. It was the most unnatural sound I have ever heard in my life. It was intelligent. It was filled with, I don't know, rage, curiosity, something that wasn't just animal. That second scream did something to me physically. Every hair on my body stood straight up, my arms, my neck, the back of my legs. A cold wave washed over me, starting at the base of my skull and flooding down my spine. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. My mouth went completely dry, my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. This was pure, undiluted fear. The kind you read about. The kind that bypasses your brain and talks directly to your lizard hindbrain, that just screams, "Run!" We didn't need to say a word to each other. We both knew. The hunt was over. Everything was over. The only thought in my head was, get to the truck. Our truck was parked about a half-mile away, down a rough 2-track trail. My friend stood up so fast he almost fell over. He didn't even bother shouldering his pack properly. He just grabbed it and held it in front of him. I did the same. I slung my bow over my shoulder, not even taking the time to make sure it was secure. We started packing up the last of our stuff, and I mean we were just throwing things. We weren't trying to be quiet anymore. The blind, which we'd so carefully folded minutes before, was just crammed into its bag, fabric tearing. We didn't care. The sound of our frantic movement seemed obscenely loud in that dead quiet forest. Every second felt like an hour. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the zipper on my pack closed. I gave up and just left it open. I kept my head on a swivel, my eyes straining against the darkness to the northwest, from where the sound had come. I couldn't see anything, just the black wall of the trees, but I felt it. I felt watched. It's a cliché, I know, but it's a cliché because it's true. It was a crawling sensation on the back of my neck, a primal certainty that something with eyes was looking right at us from the shadows. And it was big. "Let's go, let's go, let's go," my friend whispered, his voice tight and high with panic. We started walking, not running, not yet. We were trying to be quick but not reckless, but it was a losing battle. The trail was rough, littered with rocks and hidden dips. We both had headlamps, but we hadn't turned them on yet. We were still operating on some dumb hunter's instinct to not use light. But the truth was, I was afraid of what the light might show. I was more afraid of seeing it than I was of not seeing it, and stumbling. We'd only gone about 50 yards when we heard a crack, a loud, sharp snap of a branch. Not a small twig, a branch. It came from the same direction, but it sounded like it had moved. It was paralleling us. That's when we started to run. It wasn't a sprint. You can't sprint through the Arizona woods in the dark with a pack and a bow. It was a clumsy, desperate, stumbling jog. We turned on our headlamps, the beams jerking and bouncing wildly, illuminating flashes of juniper trunks, patches of prickly pear, the dusty trail. The world shrank to the little circle of light in front of my feet and the sound of our ragged breathing and pounding footsteps. Every few seconds, I'd glance over my shoulder, my headlamp beam slicing through the darkness. I never saw anything, no eye shine, no movement. But I heard it. We both heard it, the sounds of something big moving through the brush, keeping pace with us. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore either. We could hear the crush of dry vegetation, the thud of heavy footsteps that weren't ours. It was staying in the thicker timber, just off the trail, but it was right there, 100 yards away, maybe less. The half-mile to the truck felt like 10 miles. My lungs were burning. The cold air ripped at my throat. My legs felt like rubber. I was terrified I was going to trip and fall, and that would be it. I could hear my friend just ahead of me, gasping for air, his pack smacking against his back with every step. Then we broke out of the thicker trees and into the small clearing where we'd parked the truck. It was an old, beat-up Ford F-150. And I have never been so happy to see a vehicle in my entire life. We didn't stop running until we were right at the tailgate. We threw our gear into the bed. It just went in a heap. Boughs, packs, the blind, everything. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. I couldn't find them. For a heart-stopping second, I thought I'd lost them. I started patting all my pockets, my breath coming in ragged sobs. My friend was just staring back down the trail, his headlamp beam fixed on the tree line. "Hurry up, man, hurry up," he kept saying, his voice trembling. My fingers finally closed around the cold metal of the keys in my front pants pocket. I pulled them out, my hand shaking so violently I dropped them on the ground. I scrambled for them, my fingers scraping on the dirt. I grabbed them, shoved the key into the driver's side door lock, and yanked it open. We piled in. I slammed the door shut and hit the lock button. The solid thunk of the locks engaging was the best sound I'd ever heard. I shoved the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life. I didn't even let it warm up. I slammed it into reverse, spun the truck around in a cloud of dust and gravel, and then jammed it into drive. I didn't turn the headlights on until we were already moving. As the high beams cut on, they lit up the trail ahead of us, and for a split second I glanced in the rearview mirror. The clearing was empty, just our tire tracks in the dust. The tree line was a dark, impenetrable wall, but standing at the edge of that tree line, right where the trail entered the woods, was a shape. It was tall, unnaturally tall and broad. It was just standing there, perfectly still, half in shadow. It was dark. Darker than the shadows around it. I couldn't make out any features, no face, no details, just a massive black bipedal silhouette. It was watching us go. I didn't say anything. I just stomped on the gas. The truck lurched forward, the engine screaming as we bounced down the rutted trail. My friend was turned in his seat, staring out the back window. He saw it too. I saw him see it. His whole body went rigid. He didn't make a sound. He just slowly turned back around and faced forward, his hands gripping the dashboard. We drove for 20 minutes in complete silence before either of us spoke. The only sounds were the whine of the engine and the tires on the dirt road. We were both shaking. I had to pull over for a minute because my legs were trembling so bad I couldn't keep my foot steady on the gas pedal. We never talked about what we saw. Not really. We tried once we got back to his place in town. We had a beer, our hands still shaking so much the bottles clinked against our teeth. We said things like, "That was weird," and "What do you think that was?" But we didn't actually say it. We didn't give it a name. We both knew. We both knew exactly what the stories talk about, what the old folks on the res sometimes whisper about. We'd just never believed it. Not really. Not until that evening. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been back to that waterhole. I still hunt, but I stick closer to the roads now. I never stay out after dark, and every time I'm in the woods, no matter how peaceful it seems, a part of me is listening, always listening, waiting for the crickets to stop. Story 18. It was supposed to be just another trip. Me and my hunting partner, we've been coming to this same spot for years. It's way back down a logging road that's more pothole than road, a place you need a serious four-wheel drive to even think about getting to. It's always been our little slice of quiet. No people, no noise, just the woods. That's why what we saw when we pulled in that afternoon hit us so wrong. We'd been driving for 6 hours. My back was stiff, my eyes were tired from staring at the dirt road, and I was just looking forward to getting the fire going, cracking a beer, and not moving for a while. But when we rolled into our usual clearing, the one that's always been pristine, it was a mess. It looked like a bunch of idiots had a party and just walked away from it. There was garbage scattered around, chip bags, a torn plastic tarp, some empty cans. But the weird part was the center of it all. Someone had left a big cooler, the blue igloo kind, just sitting there. Next to it was a mess of cooking utensils, a blackened pot, a spatula, a few metal plates. It was all just left, and right on top of this pile of junk, someone had set up 2 big logs. They weren't just thrown there, they were placed deliberately, crisscrossed over the pile in a perfect X, like a teepee frame without the covering. It was strange. It felt intentional. Not like someone just forgot their stuff. It felt like a message, but I didn't know how to read it. My partner just shook his head and muttered something about people having no respect. We were both too tired to deal with it right then, so we decided we'd clean it up in the morning. We figured some city folks must have gotten spooked by the dark or the quiet and bailed in a hurry. We got to work setting up camp. My partner has this old 3/4-ton pickup, a real beast with a camper shell on the back. That's where we sleep. It's not fancy, but it's solid, and it keeps you off the ground. We got a fire going in the stone ring we'd built over the years, the flames feeling good against the chill that was already starting to settle in. We had some snacks, beef jerky and some crackers, and a couple of beers. We sat there, not talking much, just watching the fire and making loose plans for the next day's hunt. The usual stuff. Where we'd go, what time we'd get up. It was normal. It was comforting. The weird mess in the clearing was just a minor annoyance in the back of my mind. Eventually, the fire died down to embers, and the cold started to bite. We doused the coals, packed up the food and beer into the truck's cab. We're not stupid. You always do that in bear country, and climbed into the camper. It's a tight fit for 2 grown men, but we've done it 100 times. We have our spots. I was on the driver's side. He was on the passenger side. We got into our sleeping bags, the kind that are rated for below freezing, and the familiar smell of old canvas and pine from the air mattress filled the space. The last thing I remember is the absolute total silence of the woods at night. It's a heavy kind of quiet, so deep you can hear your own heartbeat. Then, the world exploded. It wasn't a dream. I didn't drift awake. 1 second I was dead asleep. The next I was jolted upright, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my ribs. The sound was immense, a single violent bang that seemed to come from right outside my head. The whole camper shook. It physically shuddered. The metal frame vibrated with a high-pitched ringing noise that hung in the air for a second after the bang faded. For a full 3 seconds, there was nothing. Just that ringing in my ears and the pounding of blood in my head. Then the chaos started. My partner swore, a sharp, guttural word ripped from his throat. I heard the distinct metallic snick-snick sound of him chambering around in his pistol. The sound was terrifyingly loud in the small space. My own hand was fumbling for my rifle, my fingers clumsy and numb with sleep and adrenaline. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice a dry croak. It felt wrong to speak too loud. "I don't know," he hissed back. "Sounded like someone hit the damn door with a sledgehammer." That's exactly what it sounded like someone had taken a giant hammer and slammed it against the back door of the camper. The door latch, a heavy-duty piece of steel, was still vibrating. I could feel the faint buzz through the floor. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Kids? Some drunk idiots from another campsite? But there are no other campsites out here. This spot is miles from anyone. My next thought was a bear, a big one, maybe a grizzly, though they're supposed to be rare here. But a bear would be after the food, and our food was locked in the truck cab. We'd have heard it tearing into the vehicle. "I think someone threw a rock," I said, because that was the only logical thing I could grab onto. A big rock, thrown hard. My partner didn't answer. He was already moving, crouched low, peering out the little window on his side. I did the same on mine, pressing my face against the cold glass. Outside, the world was painted in shades of grey and black. A half moon gave just enough light to see the silhouettes of the trees, standing like silent sentinels. There was nothing moving, no shapes, no sounds. The forest had gone back to that deep, heavy silence, but now it felt threatening. It felt like it was hiding something. "See anything?" I whispered. "Nothing, not a damn thing." My heart was still going a mile a minute. The adrenaline was making my hands shake. We waited there, crouched by the windows, for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes. Nothing. No more sounds. No movement. "We gotta check," my partner finally said, his voice low and tight. "We can't just sit in here." I knew he was right, but every cell in my body was screaming not to open that door. We turned on the exterior lights on the truck, the ones on the sides of the camper. They lit up a small circle around the truck in a harsh white light. It made the shadows outside the circle seem even darker. He unlocked the pistol's safety. I had my rifle ready, my finger resting along the trigger guard. He slowly unlatched the back door and pushed it open. The cold night air rushed in, smelling of pine and damp earth. We stood there in the doorway, scanning the lit-up area. Nothing. We looked at the ground around the truck, looking for footprints, for any sign of what had hit us. The ground was a mix of pine needles and hard-packed dirt. There were our boot prints from when we'd set up camp, and that was it. No new tracks, no animal prints, nothing. Then I noticed the window blinds. The ones on the inside of the back door were lying on the floor of the camper. They'd fallen off their little plastic tracks. "The blinds fell," I said, pointing. "At first, we thought that was the noise. We thought the blinds had somehow collapsed and made that god-awful bang." It was a relief for about 2 seconds. Then the logic caught up. We both looked at the flimsy plastic blinds, then at the heavy steel door, then at each other. There was no way. No way in hell those blinds falling could have made a sound that loud, an impact that violent. It was the other way around. Whatever hit the door had been so powerful, the shockwave had vibrated through the entire camper and knocked the blinds clean off their rails. The relief vanished, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in my gut. We spent the next 20 minutes outside, trying to figure it out. We were trying to be quiet, but our voices were tense, our movements jerky. We were trying to recreate the sound. My partner banged his fist on the side of the camper. It made a dull thud. He picked up a good-sized rock and hit one of the metal support legs. It made a sharp clang. But it wasn't right. It wasn't the same deep, resonant, wall-shaking bang we'd heard. Then, on a whim, he did something else. He held his hand flat, fingers together, and he slapped the side of the camper as hard as he could. Not a punch, a slap. Whump. It wasn't as loud, not nearly. The camper didn't shake, but the quality of the sound. It was closer. It was a broader, more diffuse impact sound. Not a sharp strike like a rock. A slap. We both went quiet again. We looked at the spot on the back door where the sound had come from. We ran our hands over it. The white paint was smooth. There wasn't a mark on it. No dent, no scratch, nothing. If it had been a rock, there would have been a chip, a gouge. If it had been a hammer, a dent. There was nothing. We got back inside the camper and locked the door. We didn't say anything for a long time. We just sat there in the dark, listening. The cooler. The thought hit me like a physical blow. The previous campers, they left their cooler, they left their cooking gear, they left it all with those 2 logs crossed over it. They didn't just forget, they left in a hurry. A panic. And then it all clicked into place, a picture I really didn't want to see. It wasn't a person, it wasn't a bear. A bear would have been rooting through that cooler. The food was still in there, we'd checked. A bear would have left tracks. A person would have left tracks. This thing, it didn't. It came out of the darkness, delivered one terrifyingly powerful blow to our door, a slap, not a strike, and then vanished back into the trees without leaving a single trace. My partner finally broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't trying to get in. I knew what he meant. If whatever it was had wanted in, that door wouldn't have stopped it. Not after a hit like that. It was just letting us know we weren't welcome. It was telling us to leave. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We sat there with our guns on our laps, staring into the darkness outside the windows, jumping at every little sound. The creak of a tree, the rustle of a leaf. The normal night sounds of the forest were gone. It was dead quiet. The animals were gone too. They knew. They knew something we didn't, and they were hiding. The second the sky started to turn from black to grey, we started packing. We didn't talk, we just moved fast and efficient, throwing everything into the truck. We didn't even make coffee. We left the mess in the clearing. We left the cooler, the pots, the crossed logs. We didn't touch any of it. I didn't want to go anywhere near it. As we were pulling out, my partner stopped the truck for a second. He looked back at the clearing, now just a gloomy patch in the early morning light. "You think it was, you know," he said. He didn't say the word. I just nodded. I couldn't say it either. Sasquatch. Bigfoot. The words felt stupid and childish and absolutely terrifying all at the same time. We'd spent years laughing at those stories. We weren't laughing now. We drove out of there, the truck bouncing over the ruts. I kept my eyes glued to the side mirror, watching the trees, half expecting to see something huge and dark moving between them. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. I felt like we were being watched the entire way out, until we finally hit the paved road. We never went back to that spot. We still hunt together, but we stick to more populated areas now, places where you can see other campfires at night. I still think about it, all the time. I think about that bang. I think about the sheer, raw power behind it. I think about the silence that followed. And I think about those 2 logs crisscrossed over that pile of junk, a warning we didn't understand until it was too late. I don't know what it was. I just know what it wasn't. And I know that something massive and strong and intelligent enough to not leave a trace, was out there in the dark with us, and it wanted us gone. Story 19. Okay, I'll try to write this. I've never really typed it all out before, never told the whole thing start to finish, just bits and pieces to my wife, and even then I downplayed it. But it's been on my mind lately, especially this time of year when the leaves start to turn. It happened in October, back in 2004. I need to just get it out. That morning, I was bow hunting deep in the Ozark Hills in Tenney County. I'd been going to this particular spot for a few years, a place where three really steep hills come together. The locals, the few old-timers I talked to at the diner, they called it the bottleneck. It's a tight valley, kind of V-shaped, with thick timber on all sides and a small creek running through the bottom. It felt like your own private world in there, cut off from everything. The air always seemed cooler, damper. I liked it because the deer used it as a natural funnel, especially when the acorns were dropping. You could sit up on one of the slopes and see them moving through for hours if you were patient and the wind was right. I'd gotten there well before sunrise, hiking in with a headlamp, the beam catching the fog hanging in the hollows. My stand was a simple climbing stand I'd secured about 20 feet up a stout white oak on the eastern slope. I remember the climb, the cold metal of the stand biting into my hands, the smell of the damp bark. I got settled, hung my bow on a hook, and just waited for the world to wake up, and for a while, it was perfect, just peaceful. The sky went from black to deep blue to a soft grayish pink. I heard an owl hoot one last time, way off in the distance, and then the woods just switched on. Squirrels started chattering and scrambling through the leaves. A pileated woodpecker started hammering on a dead tree somewhere to my left, the sound echoing through the valley, and the deer came. A small group of does filtered through the bottom, stepping so lightly you could barely hear them. Then a decent-sized 8-point buck came trailing behind them, nose to the ground. My heart did that little jump. It always does. I even drew my bow back when he paused behind a thicket, but he turned and walked off at a bad angle, never giving me a clear shot. I let the tension off the string slowly. No problem. That's hunting. It was still early. I remember feeling content, just sitting there, watching my breath make little clouds in the chilly air. The sun was up now, but in the bottleneck, it was just shafts of light cutting down through the canopy. It felt good, normal. It must have been around mid-morning. The sun was higher and the chill was starting to burn off. I was just scanning the opposite hillside, looking for movement, when I heard it, a single heavy step behind me. Not like a deer step is quick, light, even a big buck. This was a thud, a solid weighty sound, like someone dropped a big sack of feed on the ground. And then nothing, no follow-up steps. Just that one thud, and then the forest sounds just kept going for a second, and then they all stopped at once. It was the silence that got me first. The squirrel chatter cut out. The woodpecker stopped. It was like someone hit a mute button on the whole world. My body went rigid. I didn't even breathe. I was listening so hard my ears started to ring with the strain. I was facing the valley, but whatever had made that sound was directly behind my tree up the slope. I couldn't turn. My stand was built to face outwards, and making the noise to swivel around felt impossible. So I just sat there, frozen, my back feeling completely exposed and vulnerable. Every little pore on my skin felt like it was open, screaming. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, a hard, painful thumping. That's when the crows came. It was so sudden, it made me flinch. A whole flock of them, maybe 20 or 30, just poured out of the sky above the ridge behind me, cawing and screaming like they were being murdered. They weren't just flying, they were diving, swooping in a crazy, chaotic spiral over one specific spot in the trees, maybe 50 yards behind my stand. I'd seen crows mobbing an owl before, but this was different. This was pure panic. They were enraged, terrified. The noise was incredible, this harsh, grating cacophony that just ripped through the unnatural silence. And then, as if that was the signal, all hell broke loose. From right in the middle of that spot where the crows were diving, something enormous just exploded through the brush. There was no warning. 1 second it was just the sound of crows. The next there was this huge, crashing sound. It wasn't running away from anything. It sounded like it was just standing up. I heard limbs snapping, not little twigs, but thick, wrist-sized branches just popping and splintering. It was a sound of pure, brute force. The crows scattered, their screaming fading as they fled over the ridge. And then it was quiet again, but this was a different kind of quiet. This was a dead, heavy, waiting silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's pressing in on your eardrums. I still hadn't moved. My hands were clamped on the armrests of my stand, my knuckles white. I was shaking, a fine, constant tremor that ran through my whole body. My mind was racing, trying to fit what I'd heard into a box. I understood. A bear, maybe a really big black bear, got spooked. But that initial step, and the way it just stood up and smashed through stuff, it didn't fit. It felt bigger, more deliberate. That's when the first roar happened. It came from down in the valley, right in the bottom of the bottleneck. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a scream. It was a roar, deep, so deep I felt it in my chest and my teeth, more than I heard it with my ears. It was loud, ear-splittingly loud, but the low frequency of it is what shook me. It vibrated the air. It was a long, powerful blast of sound that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the valley. It was a sound of pure dominance, and it was answered. From the hill directly across from me, maybe 200 yards away, another one answered. Slightly higher pitched, but just as powerful. It wasn't an echo. It was a call, a response. My blood went cold. I don't mean I felt chilly. I mean a coldness washed through my veins, a feeling of dread so complete it was like I'd been dipped in ice water. There wasn't just one. There were at least two, and they were communicating. Then a third roar came from my left, further down the valley, sealing me in. Three of them, one in the bottom, one across the way, one to my left. I was in the middle of a triangle of whatever these things were. The forest didn't just go silent this time, it felt dead, utterly, completely lifeless. No insect buzz, no rustle of leaves, nothing. It was as if every living thing in a mile radius was holding its breath, praying not to be noticed. I was part of that now. I was just another animal trying to be invisible. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was hammering against my ribs so hard I was worried the sound would give me away. I could feel sweat trickling down my back and my temples, cold and clammy. My mouth was so dry, my tongue felt like it was stuck to the roof of my mouth. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been 2 minutes or 20. Time just stopped. All I could do was listen, my head on a swivel, my eyes straining to see anything, any movement in the thick undergrowth. I kept expecting to see one of them step out into the open, a massive dark shape moving between the trees. But I saw nothing, nothing at all. That was almost worse. My imagination was painting pictures far more terrifying than anything my eyes could have seen. I knew I couldn't stay. The thought of being stuck in that tree when it got dark was unthinkable. A primal survival part of my brain kicked in, overriding the frozen fear. I had to move. Slowly, unhooking my bow from the tree, I made the decision to leave everything else. My backpack was on the ground at the base of the tree. It had water, snacks, extra gear. It was staying. I couldn't make noise climbing down. I had to lower myself as quietly as possible. Getting out of the stand was the hardest part. Every creak of the metal, every scrape of my boot against the tree trunk sounded like a gunshot in that silence. I was convinced that at any moment, one of those roars would rip through the air right next to me. I made it to the ground, my legs so wobbly I almost collapsed. I stood with my back against the rough bark of the oak, just trying to breathe, to listen. Still nothing, just that oppressive, watchful silence. My truck was half a mile away, back up the trail I'd come in on, which was to my right, the one direction I hadn't heard a roar from. It felt like my only escape route. I started backing away from the tree, moving sideways, keeping my eyes scanning the woods around me. I didn't turn my back on the valley. I held my bow in front of me, nocked with an arrow, but it felt like a toy, a stupid, useless toy. What was a broadhead going to do against something that could make a sound like that? The half-mile hike in had been a pleasant, mindful walk. The half-mile hike out was a nightmare. Every shadow between the trees looked like a hulking form. Every rustle of a leaf in the slight breeze made me jump. My senses were so heightened, I could see individual needles on the pine trees 50 yards away. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. I moved like that for what felt like an eternity, stepping backwards, then turning to glance behind me, then shuffling sideways again. My progress was painfully slow. My muscles were screaming with tension. I was trembling so badly I was worried I'd drop my bow. I kept expecting a hand, a massive, hairy hand, to reach out from behind a tree and grab me. I finally reached the edge of the thicker timber and broke into the more open, sunlit power line cut where my truck was parked. The sight of that old, beat-up Ford pickup was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I didn't run. I was still too scared to make that much noise. I just walked as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint, my eyes locked on the truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the door lock. I threw my bow into the passenger seat, climbed in, and slammed the door shut. The sound of the lock clicking into place was a tiny metallic prayer answered. I jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine turned over with a roar that for the first time in what felt like hours was a comforting man-made sound. I threw it into drive and spun the truck around, gravel spraying. As I started speeding down the dirt road, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The Bottleneck Valley was just a dark green smudge between the hills now. I rolled down the window, needing the air, needing to hear. And that's when I heard it. Faint but clear, carried on the wind. One last roar. It wasn't the ear-splitting, chest-shaking roar from before. It was different. It was lower, longer, almost contemplative. It was a sound that said, "I'm still here." I stomped on the gas and didn't look back. I never went hunting in that area again. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, a freak occurrence, but I've heard bears. I've seen bears. That wasn't a bear. The coordination of those calls, the sheer power behind them, the way the forest reacted. It was something else, something that doesn't fit in any book or on any chart. For months afterwards, I had trouble sleeping. I'd jolt awake in the middle of the night, hearing that heavy step or that first roar in my dreams. The memory of it is like a cold stone in my gut even now. It confirmed something for me that I guess a part of me never really wanted to know for sure. There are places out there, remote hollows in those old hills, where things live that are far, far larger than any animal we know about, and they know we're there.